Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting an exciting new series. What if Deku had plant manipulation quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Micmager on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Inko Midoriya considered herself a good mother. She did her best to provide for and care for her wonderful bundle of joy and ray of sunshine Izuku, even if part of her still feels extreme guilt about how she handled his quirkless diagnosis. She knew that she didn't tell her son what he wanted and needed to hear, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him he could be a hero without a quirk. Deep down, on some logical level, she knew it was possible, but didn't want her baby boy to go through what he would have to in order to achieve it. She would rather keep him safe and help him find a new dream and find friends to grow up happy with before eventually finding a great partner and giving her as many adorable grandbabies as possible. Izuku's safety was always her number one concern, which is why she was currently livid and standing outside her best friend's home, trying to calm down before she started doing anything beyond talking. Several minutes later, anger sufficiently reined in and breathing evened as much as she thought currently possible. Inko firmly knocked on the front door. She couldn't hold back the exasperated sign and the small upward twitch of her lips as she heard her best friend yelling at someone to get the door. Her small smile was instantly wiped away when she heard a child screaming back to his mother that he would get the door. Inko forced herself to crush the spike of anger that had ambushed her at the child's voice just in time before the door was yanked open, and a small child with spiky blonde hair looked at her with a smile and greeted her with his usual, "Hey, Auntie Inko." Fighting every urge to shout at the boy in front of her to never call her that again, she managed to respond with a measured, "Hello, Katsuki. Are your parents both home?" The old man and the hag are sitting on the couch, working on some new shirt design or something. Katsuki managed to shout out as he was running back to his room. Task evidently considered completed. Normally, Inko would have chuckled at the boy's energy by today. It could only annoy her when she realized he couldn't be bothered to invite her in. Briefly stopping to deposit her shoes at the door and slide on her personal slippers the Bakugos family kept at the door for her, Inko stepped in and closed the door behind her before making her way to the living room. Rounding the corner of the hallway, she was able to see the back of her friend and her husband's heads leaning over the coffee table poring over a large sketch pad. The blonde woman raised her head, and on seeing Inko, her face split into a familiar, slightly feral grin. "Inko, come, we were just looking over the sketches for the new fall lineup this year. What brings you over, and do you want some tea?" "Hello, Mitsuki. Masaru. Some tea would be great. Preferably something calming, as I believe we're going to need it." Inko managed with a genuine but subdued smile. "I'm afraid I didn't come with good news today." The man, Masaru, took a deep breath and moved to the kitchen to pour them all a cup of his favorite tea that always calmed he and his wife and Inko had always enjoyed. Mitsuki quickly put away the designs and the other paperwork, managing to sit down just as her husband was returning with the tea. Both Bakugos focused on Inko for several awkward seconds before Mitsuki broke the silence. "What happened? Is this about Izuku? Is he okay?" Inko took a sip of her tea and gave an appreciative sigh as she reached into her handbag to pull out a small data card. "I have something for you to watch. Katsuki should be here to watch it with us." "Izuku is fine. He's resting right now." Relief filled the faces of her two friends before Masaru gained an exasperated look. "Katsuki did something again, didn't he?" Inko could only reply with a nod and a curt "indeed." A weary sign escaped her best friend's lips, followed by a loud brat. "Get in here!" Fast footsteps sounded as the child in question appeared in the room, shouting back his reply, "What do you want, Hag?" Mitsuki didn't get a chance to reply as Katsuki was picked up and placed on the couch between his parents by a very unimpressed father. "Sit down, Katsuki." The tone in his father's voice froze the boy in place, dread already starting to settle into the young boy's mind. Inko nodded in approval as she inserted the data card into the large TV and used the remote to navigate to the only video available before hitting play and sitting back in her chair, leaning forward and glaring at the screen with her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The three Bakugos began watching with rapt attention, but very quickly all three grew incredibly different facial expressions as soon as the camera focused on the playground showing four children, one running from the other three. The picture quality being good enough to clearly make out the faces of all four kids, one being absolutely terrified, and the other three sporting what could only be described as sadistic grins. Katsuki and his parents watched on as the on-screen Katsuki tackled the child, none of them recognized to the ground, where he and two of his friends started beating the child. His parents' horrified expressions only got worse when they started hearing the all-too-familiar popping sounds as the Katsuki on screen started weaving in his explosions between punches. Then they heard him berate the boy by asking if he still thought his quirk was cooler than Katsuki's own. Inko noticed the two parents begin to round on the child between them and decided to cough to get their attention. The video isn't over. It gets worse, she muttered with a scowl deepening every second when she and everyone else noticed a boy with unruly green hair run into the frame and place himself between the two sides. "No!" Mitsuki pleaded. "Yes." Inko grumbled as the three adults watched Izuku throw his arms out to shield the fourth child from view. "Kaachan, stop. You've already won. You're making him cry. Why are you being so mean? Shut up, stupid Deku. I'm showing this extra his place. He was looking down on me, saying his quirk was better than mine. Now get out of my way, so I can make sure he learns his lesson. And no, Kaachan. If you don't stop, I'll have Tito stop you and myself. So the worthless Deku wants to play hero, huh? I guess we'll have to remind you of your place too. Stupid, worthless, quirkless, defenseless. DQ." The three adults then watched in a combination of horror, disgust, concern, and anger as the Katsuki on screen and his two lackeys brutally beat Izuku for the next 10 minutes, screaming obscenities and insults at him the entire time. After what seemed like forever to the adults, the on-screen Katsuki got up and told his followers they were done showing this piece of shit loser his place, and they walked off screen. The video continued playing, being fast-forwarded now by roughly 2 hours before Izuku began moving again, trying in vain for several minutes to get up, looking around confused before a sad look passed over his face, and he stumbled off screen in the direction everyone present recognized as his home. "I'm leaving this copy with you. I've decided to move Izuku far away from here to try to find him a safe place to learn and grow. I just wanted to make sure you saw what Katsuki did and to tell you that he is not allowed anywhere near Izuku in the future if he can't learn to be a better person. If I catch him interacting with Izuku again before he makes significant changes, I will be speaking to the police and getting a formal restraining order. I still want to continue speaking with you too, as we always have, but it will be over the phone, and until I feel my son is safe, I won't be telling you where we live. Thank you for the tea. Goodbye." Inko stood and left the room, putting her shoes back on and leaving the Bakugo residence without looking back. 3 days later, Izuku's POV. When Izuku could feel himself starting to wake up, it was to a strange beeping sound on his left. He tried to open his eyes but found them feeling crusty, like when he slept too long and had the bits of eye gunk but all over his eyes. Reaching up to try to wipe some of the stuff away, he felt something like a plastic rope tangled on his right arm. It took some effort, but he managed to clear the crusty stuff away enough to open his eyes to see that he was in a strange room with several machines, and the plastic rope was actually a tube running from his arm to a bag of something that looked like water, hanging on what looked like a metal coat rack. Taking in more of the room, he saw a cup and a pitcher of water on the small table to his right, which seemed to remind his mouth that it was dry. Just as he was going to try reaching for the cup, the door opened, and an older woman in a white work uniform that he remembered seeing as school nurse, or so he guessed that she was also a nurse, but he didn't get a chance to ask her before she noticed him looking at her, and she gave him a reassuring smile. "You're awake. That's great. We thought it might take another day or so. Let me go get the doctor and call your mother and okay? I'll just help you get some water first." At the mention of his mother, Izuku perked up, taking the cup from the lady and watching her leave the room again. He barely had time to raise the cup to his lips before his mom burst into the room and ran towards him. Izuku briefly worried that she would knock the cup out of his hands when she would wrap him up in one of her hugs that always made him think that she must have a minor strength quirk when his mom surprised him by stopping mid-lunch. The look of confusion and surprise in her eyes was all it took to let Izuku know that she didn't stop herself. Izuku heard a loud sigh and turned his head to see the same nurse from before, but the sleeves of her uniform were wrapped around his mother's waist, stopping her from crushing him in the expected hug. Miss Midoriya, I can't let you hurt our patient any more than he already is. Nor can I let you rip his fore out with what was clearly an overzealous hug. He heard his mother let out a short squeak before the nurse continued, voice laden with affectionate teasing. Now, I'm going to let you go, but you cannot jump on him again, and no hugs while I go get the doctor. Izuku watched his mother make the same face he makes when he gets caught doing something bad, and lets out a small giggle, noticing again how dry his mouth and throat are. He takes a sip of water while the nurse leaves the room again to find a doctor. He sees his mother reaching forward and running her hand through his hair in what he knows is her way of comforting them both, so he leans into the touch while they wait. The door opens, and a man walked in wearing something like he remembered the Quirk doctor wearing from 2 years ago, so he thinks this is probably the doctor the nice lady talked about. Hello, Miss Midoriya, little Izuku. I am Dr. Tsuchikawa. I was the leading physician in charge of Izuku's treatment during his stay here in Mizuta for pediatric care, and I'm here to check on the little guy now that he's awake to make sure that everything is okay. The doctor spent the next 15 minutes looking over Izuku and the machines in the room and giving his mom a calming look. Little Izuku is going to be fine. He's going to be bruised for a few days, possibly up to a week and a half. And he's going to have burn marks on him for a while, but he'll make a full recovery very soon. Izuku could see his mom's shoulders relax at the news, and she thanked the doctor as he left the room. She turned to him and gave him a look that he'd only seen a few times in the past when he'd done something he wasn't supposed to, and she wanted answers. Izuku, there are several questions I want to ask you, but I need to bring in a guest before I do. I'll be right back. Sit tight and don't try to get up. He watched his mom walk quickly out of the room and returned shortly, followed by a tall man with a plain face, short black hair, and kind eyes, wearing a long brown trench coat. Hello, Izuku. I am Detective Naomasa Sakachi. I'm here to have you answer a couple of questions for us about how you ended up here. Don't worry, you aren't in trouble. I've already seen the footage of what happened in the playground. I just need to clarify a few things with you. Izuku began to tremble when he heard the word detective, but when the man finished talking, he had calmed down a lot. Oh, okay, I'll try to answer. The detective gave him a nod. Excellent. Now I need to know what started that fight with the other 4 children. Izuku rapidly rocked his head back and forth and took a deep breath. Kaachan heard Kimiturkuin say that he had the coolest quirk in the class now, and he didn't like that, so when school let out, he chased Kimiturkuin to the playground and started hitting him. The detective nodded again. Why do you think the little Bakugo boy reacted that way? He is always reminding people that he has the coolest quirk in school. The teachers have always said so, and they're right. His quirk is super cool and would be really useful as a hero. The teacher said so? Yes? The teachers have always told Kaachan that he's definitely going to become a top hero with his super cool flashy quirk. That's what everyone is always telling Kaachan. Why does he call you Deku? Izuku froze at this question for several seconds, and his head jerkily swung towards his mom, who looked him in the eye and told him to be honest with the detective. He calls me that because it means someone who can't do anything, to remind me that I'm useless and can't do anything right. He could see his mom shaking in the chair next to his bed and watched her hands curl into tight balls. Do your teachers know what he calls you and why? Everyone calls me Deku, even the TT teachers. Now he could see the detective's eyes squint, and what he could tell was anger played across his face before he could get his expression back to what it was, but failing to stop the vein visibly throbbing on his left temple. Your teachers tell you that you're useless? Everyone says that I'm a useless quirkless freak. Do the other kids bully you too, or is it just Bakugo? Kaachan doesn't bully me, he's my friend. He practically screamed his last answer and was breathing heavily now, tears welling at the corner of his eyes. Just as he could tell he was going to start panicking, his mom patted his hand to get his attention. Izuku, sweetie, Katsuki is not your friend. Friends don't treat each other the way he treats you. Friends don't hurt each other and not check on you to make sure you're okay. Katsuki is a bully, and his parents know about it now. Izuku wanted to defend Kaachan again. He really did, but the look in his mom's eyes was telling him that she wouldn't listen to him try to speak up for his old friend again. So he looked back at the detective, intent on getting the rest of the questions over with. The other kids all treat me badly. They all say mean things and hit me and use me to practice their quirks. They take my stuff and hide it or break it. They take my lunch and eat it in front of me or throw it in the trash while I watch. This time the detective didn't bother hiding his displeasure, rage, and disgust plain on his face. Do your teachers ever stop this from happening? No. They ignore it or say that it's good to get practice in early for your quirk so that you can use it better when you're older. Both adults stood up with what Izuku could only see as horror on their faces, like when he watched that scary movie with Kaachan that one time and had nightmares for weeks after it. His mother began to cry and asked him why he never told her, and he started crying too while trying to say that he didn't want to worry her. Detective Tsukachi paced the room a few times waiting for the crying to stop, and when it finally started to die down, he handed Izuku a notebook and a pen and asked him to write down in as much detail as possible what has been done to him and by who, paying special attention to what the teachers around him have said and done. Then he apologized and walked out of the room with his mom to ask her a few more questions. Izuku had too many thoughts and emotions going through his head right now. He didn't want to get anyone in trouble, he didn't want to cause any trouble, and he really didn't want to make his mom worry. But he was also tired of the bullying and wanted to hope that maybe things could finally be better. Eyes set in a determined glare, normally only reserved for when he is looking for new All Might merchandise, Izuku began to write. And write, providing every detail he could remember of all of the bullying he had received for the last 2 years after his quirkless diagnosis was revealed to the class by his mean teachers. I hope this changes something. Inko followed the detective out of the room, doing everything in her power to hold back the waterfall of tears threatening to pour out onto the floor in an attempt to hide her distress at the situation from her now admitted, chronically tormented son. Fists clenching hard enough to leave her knuckles white, she struggled to sort through the acts committed by the children and adults against her little boy. Special attention being paid to memorizing the names of the Targ, former teachers who not only allowed the bullying to happen, but actually participated in the acts. She knew they would pay for this, just wasn't sure to what extent yet. So many ideas flew through her mind that she unknowingly began muttering. Not quite to the speed her son was capable of, but still not comprehensible to anyone without a quirk that could play back sounds at reduced speed. Mrs. Midoriya. Inko's head snapped to the detective and replied on reflex. Just Miss Midoriya or Inko, please. Is there anything you need from me, detective? My apologies, but yes. Once we get the notes from your son, we will need to discuss legal options unless you do not want to press charges. Inko could practically taste the tone of judgment in the last bit of what the detective said and smirked. Detective, I will be pursuing all involved adult parties as far as the law allows. I welcome any help you, your precinct, or any legal aid you want to recommend would be willing to give. Children, especially as young as those wrapped up in this, cannot be blamed. The teachers, faculty, and parents are the most egregious, however. They will be held accountable. Inko couldn't remember ever being this angry, not even when she found her ex-husband in bed with another woman. Noticing a few dust particles beginning to gather and form indistinct shapes around her, she shook herself out of that line of thinking and continued. I just need to find another place to live, preferably far away from his tormentors. I wanted to get out of the city for a while. Maybe I'll look into getting us a place out in the countryside. Tsukachi reached up and grabbed his chin in thought for a moment before snapping his fingers, startling Inko out of her muttering trance. Sorry, Miss Midoriya. I just remembered a colleague of mine moved here from the Mie Prefecture. Said it was a peaceful area with no quirk discrimination allowed in the schools. Says it helped a lot because of his mutations to be able to grow up without dealing with the ridicule most mutant types go through. Something to look into if you don't have somewhere else in mind already. The young detective smiled at the look of gratitude Inko was giving him as the door opened, and Izuku stood in the doorway, holding the notebook in his arm, while dragging the four stand along. Resigning herself to having to explain to her son why he didn't need to bring the notebook to them and risk hurting himself. The little ray of sunshine told her he didn't want them to have to come and get it themselves. Inko took the notebook from him and handed it to the detective so she could help Izuku back into bed. She could hear the detective going through the pages and periodically grunting in obvious dissatisfaction. Turning around when she heard the man clear his throat, she was handed the notes and told to read a section about one of the teachers Izuku had written about and couldn't stop the look of unbridled rage that took over her face. She handed the book back to the detective, confirmed he didn't need them for anything else, and saw him to the door thanking him for his time and giving him her number for any follow-ups before turning back to Izuku and tucking him in. Her poor boy must have been exhausted because he fell asleep in a couple of minutes while she began researching the Mie Prefecture. It was a full 2 weeks later that the doctors cleared Izuku with a clean bill of health and allowed him to check out. Inko had gone with the nurse to complete the paperwork when the doctor flagged her down at the nurse's station for a chat. "Miss Midoriya, I am glad to see Izuku well and bouncing around again. I just wanted to make sure you knew that he is at the age where you need to register his quirk so that the authorities do not come looking for you. I'm not sure why you haven't registered his quirk as of yet, but I understand that sometimes life gets hectic and certain things can fall to the wayside, but this is a legal matter that shouldn't be put off anymore. I can help you start the paperwork if you'd like before you leave if you wouldn't mind coming to my office and describing his quirk to me," the doctor said while maintaining his professional smile, trying his hardest not to judge the young mother for leaving this for so long. Inko, on the other hand, was stuck between being confused and angry at this man for his callous remarks, and before she could rein in her temper, she lashed out screeching at the top of her lungs, "How dare you? It's bad enough that my son has to be berated, ostracized, and beaten by everyone around him just because he's quirkless. But now you want to throw salt on an open wound? Where do you get off picking on a 6-year-old who just spent 2 weeks in the hospital after being beaten nearly to death just because he doesn't have a quirk?" Anyone who wasn't already paying attention to the nurse's station before definitely was now, torn between looking at the clearly irate mother with a manic look in her eyes and what seems like a quirkus doctor who is white as a sheet and clearly surprised by the response. "Ma'am, please stop yelling. I am not picking on your son," the doctor said, waving his arms frantically in front of his face, trying to calm the woman whose eyes had begun to glow a neon green and paper clips had started floating across the nurse's station. "Please let me explain. I don't know what you're talking about. Your son isn't quirkless." Inko reeled back, eyes losing their glow, stationery falling back to their places on the desk beside her, without her realizing she had ever grabbed it with her quirk in the first place, the shock on her face plain for everyone in the room to see. She tried responding for several seconds, but only managed to sputter out a slightly coherent "w." She grabbed the counter beside her to prevent herself from fainting like she knew she was about to do, and managed to take several deep breaths while several medical staff surrounded her making sure she was all right. After the head nurse checked her eyes, she waved everyone off with a polite bow and looked at the doctor, standing ramrod straight with sweat pouring off of himself, and eyes clenched shut as if readying himself for her to maim him for the perceived slight against her son. Regathering herself, she moved closer to the man and lowered her voice. "Would you mind talking to me about this in a more private area? I would like more information and don't want people staring at me if I come close to fainting again," she said, watching the man's eyes shoot open with what could possibly have been the most relieved expression she'd ever seen on his face as his whole body relaxed, and he let out a breath she could tell he didn't know he was holding. "Right this way, ma'am. Let's step into my office so we can go over the details." The doctor hurriedly placated and walked her to his office before shutting the door. The doctor offered her a cup of tea, which Inko politely declined in favor of getting to the point while he shuffled around to his seat. "So, there seems to have been either a mix-up or a misdiagnosis involving your son's quirk status. Could you please explain to me what you were told, so I can try to fix this?" the doctor said while steepling his fingers and adopting what he hoped was a calm look on his definitely not panicking face while he stared at the terrifying Mons. Concerned mother sitting across his desk from him. "Our family doctor told us 2 years ago that Izuku was quirkless and showed us an x-ray wherein he pointed out the extra toe joint on Izuku's feet and said that if he had the toe joint he was quirkless and should give up hope of ever manifesting his quirk or becoming a hero, traumatizing my son for the next 2 years of his life. Since then we have heard nothing else from the doctor's office other than a notice that he had moved away from the city a few months ago and was no longer practicing medicine." Inko relayed with what the doctor could tell was an explanation she'd had to give more than once before. She sighed and continued, "Izuku has suffered so much since then. His friends in preschool, his teachers who were watching over the kids. Now in a primary school, he's getting the same treatment, but worse. Everyone around him, save for myself, has turned on him and treated him horribly. I just recently found out that the child Izuku considered his best friend closer than a brother to him, has been physically beating him, mentally tearing him apart, and using him as quirk target practice the entire time. Now you tell me that he has a quirk. I don't know what to think about this. She began taking several calming breaths, eyes closed, almost entirely forgetting the other occupant of the room until he spoke up. Miss Midoriya, I am sorry that this has happened to your son, but I need to clear up a few things. First, your son does have a quirk. His blood tests came back positive for the quirk gene. Second, there have been several scientific studies done in the last 40 years that have debunked the claim that an extra toe joint makes you quirkless. Third, the indicators that we're seeing from his blood test indicate that not only does your son have a quirk, it's a fairly powerful one at that, and it has something to do with nature. The diagnostician that works here with an analytical quirk is off on a month-long honeymoon. The man grumbled under his breath here, and Inko managed to make out the words, "lucky bastard," causing her to give a small giggle, so we haven't been able to figure out anything other than that. I would suggest that you either see a specialist or take the little one out to do various activities in nature, or spend some time out away from the city, or even just try gardening. Anything you can think of that might cause him to begin manifesting some abilities so that we can get his quirk registered as required by law. For now, I've left it as an undetermined quirk with a nature subtype, and it fits both the mutation and emitter classifications. The doctor seemed genuinely pleased at the look of elation on Inko's face as he kept talking and explaining away her worries, especially at the mention of spending time away from the city. Doctor, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You don't know how happy this makes me and will make Izuku. I can't wait to tell him he has a quirk, and it works so well that it's nature-based. We're moving out to the countryside, and we'll be surrounded by nature, and I already plan to have a small garden for the two of us to work on together. Inko was now beside herself with joy, already moving to leave the seat and run to her son to surprise him with the news when the doctor stopped her with a clearing of his throat and a wave of his hand. She sat back down with a confused look on her face at that, and waited for him to explain himself. Ma'am, might I suggest you not spoil the secret so quickly? It might make your son happier to discover he has a quirk on his own. He flashed a warm smile her way and adopted a conspiratorial grin as he leaned towards Inko. After all, he's told me so much about how he likes to analyze quirks. How do you think he'll react to having the ability to analyze his own? Inko returned his grin with one that she'd find more often than not on her best friend Mitsuki's face, and agreed with the man before making her way back out to finish the discharge paperwork and collecting Izuku in his bag. She began walking him out to the cab she had called a few minutes ago and helped Izuku get in and buckled up and watched his face form a look of growing confusion and curiosity before he finally turned to her and asked, were we not going home right away, adding the little head tilt at the end that she and her group of mom friends had decided was illegally cute. We are going home, sweetheart. We don't live at that apartment anymore. I've found us a new place to stay, and I can't wait to show you around. Inko poked his chubby little cheeks at this, causing him to let out a giggle that was music to her ears. The two sat and talked about anything Izuku wanted to talk about, but Inko refused to answer any questions about their new home or when he was going back to school. Eventually, the taxi pulled over at the train station, and the family of two got out, grabbed their things, and Inko led her curious son over to the ticket booth and then onto the train that they only had to wait a few minutes for. Inko sat Izuku down beside her and gave him one of his notebooks to keep him occupied while she settled into her seat to pore over more information on her phone that Detective Tsukachi had been updating her with over the course of the investigation. The two sat in relative silence, broken only by Izuku asking random people nearby about their quirks and scribbling in his notebook about any super cool quirks. Spoiler, it was all of them, until Izuku fell asleep curled up in Inko's lap. The 4-hour train ride eventually came to an end when Inko heard the automated voice calling out the name of her stop, and she picked Izuku up and did her best to carry him off the train without waking him up. She managed to call for a taxi and get Izuku buckled into his seat, and halfway to their new home when he woke up and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. His head began swiveling as he took in his surroundings outside of the car, seeing so much open space that he wasn't accustomed to, and just as he was about to ask her what she could tell would be many questions, she watched him grind to a halt. Sensing something was wrong, she curled her fingers around his shoulder and brought him closer to her. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked, hoping to prompt him into talking. It's nothing, Mom. I was just wondering if it was my fault that we had to move." Izuku said while doing the best his 6-year-old body could do not to cry in the taxi. Even as young as he was, he knew how much he cried and didn't want to ruin the nice man's car. Inko had to exercise a lot of self-control to not bring both hands to her mouth and do exactly what Izuku was trying his best not to do. After a few moments to collect herself again, she responded to him in as calm and gentle a voice as she could muster. Izuku, sweetheart, it's not your fault that we moved. You were having to deal with something that no one your age should deal with. Actually, no one of any age should have to deal with it. You are so strong, but I wish you had told me what was happening before. I could have gotten you out of that situation much sooner. You don't need to take all of the burden alone. You're my baby boy, and you are only 6. You are smart. So smart, but you don't know how things are supposed to be fixed yet. It's not your fault, and if I remember what you wrote in that notebook correctly, you have always done everything you could to do the right thing, even when it got you in trouble with everyone around you. I am proud of everything you have done, and I want you to keep doing everything you have been doing so far, but please don't hide things from me anymore. I promise you that I won't think you or your problems are a bother. You're all I have, and I won't let you suffer alone like that ever again. She punctuated the statement with the warmest hug she could give him while sitting next to each other. Luckily for the driver, they had reached their destination, and he, thankfully, wouldn't have to deal with the water damage that was about to be inflicted on his car. He got out of the car and helped the young mother and her son out and got their luggage from the trunk, giving Inko a good-natured nod and smile before leaving after she declined his help in bringing the bags and suitcases inside. She looked at Izuku, who was now whipping his head back and forth, trying to take in everything about the house in front of him. All things considered, it was much larger than their apartment. The perks of the reduced housing costs in the countryside, and the large fenced and front yard which wrapped around both sides of the house, transitioning from the wooden picket fencing out front to the chest-high, for Inko, white concrete walls that led to the backyard. His eyes widened as he took in the house itself. A large white home with a covered top front porch held up by wide, sturdy pillars and framed by uninhabited planting beds just under the windows spaced out over the face of the structure. His eyes ran up, head tilting back as they continued sliding further and further up, seeing the second story and the high roof with the chimney poking up out of the left side and multiple windows that looked like they might open outwards and upwards to allow hot air to escape in the summer or be closed to let the sun warm the attic in the winter. So engrossed in what he was seeing he didn't register the look of relief that flooded Inko's face as she watched him looking over the place. Not sure what she'd do if he didn't like the house she picked out for them. She was so focused on his apparent acceptance of the new place that she didn't react instantly when he turned to her with stars in his eyes. We get to live here now. This place is so big, and we have a yard now. Can we go around back or wait? We should go inside. Izuku in all his excitement flew into one of the Midoriya mutterstorms. She will get that trademarked. She doesn't know how yet, but it's so cute that she'll find a way. Before he could stop himself, and she let him go on until he needed to take a breath before she cut in to stop him from continuing. Yes, Izuku, we live here now. And there's a bigger yard out back that I can't wait to show you, but we really should get our stuff put inside and maybe get something to drink first before I give you the big tour. She gave him a smile that he matched, and suddenly everyone in the new town felt the need to shield their eyes, and even though they didn't know why, they knew that everything was too bright. The boy jumped up and down and grabbed a bag in each hand before running to the door, dropping them off carefully, and running back to help with more of the bags. Inko chuckled and laughed at his eagerness, knowing that he was already happier than she had seen him in months. Maybe tomorrow you could help me plan a few things, some flowers for the planting beds here in the front under the windows, and maybe a small garden for us out back. She did want to add some more life and color to the place, as it was mostly just the blue shingled roof on a white house with a green front yard, not exactly something that screamed lived into her, and she could cross off one of the suggestions from the doctor if Izuku's Quirk didn't respond to planting the garden, as he had mentioned. She could only give another gushing smile when he turned his megawatt toothy grin on her again, while nodding his head so fast she was almost worried he'd toss it off his shoulders. Good, let's get this put away then. The next day, Inko made sure to get the map for the town they lived in now downloaded and saved to her phone, and had the app open so that she could make use of the GPS function, before she led them both out on a 20-minute walk to the closest store that looked like it might be a nursery. She was pleasantly surprised when it turned out that she was right, and the young man behind the counter greeted them with a bright smile and asked if he could help them find anything. Inko took up her thinking pose, back straight, one arm holding the other up to cup her chin, and tapping her middle finger while she considered what she wanted while thinking of how best to do this in a way that might show her what Izuku's quirk could be. Could you please show us the seeds for the seasonal vegetables and some assorted flowers, seedlings for a few bushes, and saplings for a couple of native fruit trees? I want to get a variety for a home garden, some color in our front yard, and have some fruit trees that we can pick from in several years. She listed off what she wanted and why without falling into a mutter storm of her own, a result of years of practice and many embarrassing secrets being shared accidentally. The two Midoriyas followed the young man through the store, taking his recommendation for nearly every plan introduced to them and writing down the care instructions for everything that they eventually purchased and set up a time for delivery so they could go get their groceries. Walking to the nearest grocery store was another 10-minute trek through the small town with many people greeting them and asking if they were new to the area, something to get used to with everyone knowing everyone else when the population density was so low to be sure. They explored the grocery store and picked out all of the essentials for the next week, including ingredients for Izuku's favorite katsudon, though Inko didn't tell him that yet, keeping it as a surprise for him in case he fell into another depressive funk later. The walk back home was uneventful, if heartwarming, with all of the locals continuing to greet them and initiate small talk, including a woman with shoulder-length light brown hair that seemed to lift itself slightly, holding hands with a girl around Izuku's age that looked remarkably similar to the woman, but with little pads on her fingers and small round blush marks on her cheeks. Inko and the woman, Uraraka Hoshi, hit it off very quickly over their shared love of their children, and each tried to seem like they weren't watching their children as the little girl. Ochako was her name. Lovely name, Inko thought. Shuffled up to the shy Izuku and tried to strike up a conversation. Hi, I'm Uraraka Ochako. Nice to meet you. I don't remember you from school. What class are you in? Ochako rattled off with the brightest smile Inko had seen on any child that wasn't Izuku. Speaking of Izuku, the poor boy could barely get out a few choked noises for several seconds before finally getting his mouth to start working. Hello. I am Midoriya Izuku. And nice to meet you too. My mom and I just moved here yesterday, and I haven't been to the new school yet. Inko was proud of his stutter, slowly going away the longer he talked to the girl. Hopefully, he could make a new friend that seemed very nice so far. Oh, so you're new here. Where do you live? Can I come play? The little girl's eyes lit up with stars while her mother chuckled and whispered conspiratorially to Inko, do you mind setting up a playdate sometime? I think she might start a riot if I tell her no at this point. Inko joined her with a whispered, if she wants to play, she can come over anytime. Izuku won't be starting school for another week while we adjust to the new place, so you and your daughter are welcome anytime, though we will be planning today when we get home. She quickly checked her watch. Do you have anything planned around 3? We should be done planting the bushes and flowers in the front yard by then, and they can run and play in the backyard. I think Izuku would love to have a new friend so soon after moving, and you can both stay for dinner if you like. Don't tell him, but we're having katsudon. It's his favorite. If we wouldn't be a bother, I don't see a problem with that at all. My husband will be working until late anyway tonight, so it gives us something to do besides strolling around town or being cooped up in the house. Hoshi said with a gentle smile, holding out her hand for Inko to shake. Grabbing the hand she was offered, Inko returned the smile. You wouldn't be a bother at all. Izuku hasn't had a good history with his friends where we used to live, so I want him to have someone he can trust as soon as possible. Who knows, if they remain friends, we might be closer in the years to come. I know I need more people my age to interact with. My best friend is currently unable to be physically present in our lives, so I'd like some time to chat and maybe get to know you. I think we can work something out. We seem to be heading in the same direction. Shall we follow you home so that we know where to go when 3 o'clock rolls around? Hoshi says as she starts walking again, making sure to clasp her daughter's hand in hers while the children were still talking. Sure thing, we're not too terribly far away now. Just a few more minutes down the road, Inko said as she took Izuku's hand in hers and started walking with, hopefully, the new family friends. Soon after, the 4 of them arrived at the new household, and the Urarakas bid farewell until the afternoon, with both Midoriyas waving goodbye and Izuku shouting that he would see them later. Inko asked for Izuku's help with the groceries quickly before the plants arrived. The two made quick work of the groceries, Inko still hiding the fact that she picked up everything for Kaachan, when they heard a loud horn blaring in the road out front. The two of them hurried out to help unload the truck, and the driver was nice enough to help move the bushes and saplings to where they needed them, since they were the heaviest of what was purchased. Inko made sure Izuku gave a sincere thank you to the nice man, and once he'd left they stared at the pots of bushes and bags of mulch and fertilizer, both ready to work hard and get the front yard planted as soon as possible so that they'd have more time with the new possible friends. Inko tried to be as subtle as possible in ensuring that Izuku had a hand in planting everything, from the large pots of camellia to the comparatively tiny dwarf barberry shrubs to the hopefully vibrant flower seeds that were planted based on color patterns that Inko thought might be tasteful. She wanted something to break up the monotony of greens and whites. Not a tacky color explosion more fit for a glitter factory floor, thank you very much. She kept a close eye on Izuku as he struggled to help her lower the bushes into place and pack them back in with topsoil mixed with fertilizer and topped with what was apparently cedar mulch. Neither of them knowing if that meant anything, and meticulously placing each seed where she had marked and carefully filling those in while she read off the instructions for each one for optimal growing conditions starting from seed. All in all, they worked and planned, and occasionally had to move a bush around after realizing what flowers should be popping up where. But near 2:30 they finished, and Inko sent him in to wash up quickly so that he wouldn't be covered in dirt when his new friend arrived. She herself stepping into the shower quickly as soon as he left the bathroom, deciding to take a proper bath later in the evening. She got redressed and started making snacks and tea when she heard knocking at the door. Before she could say anything, Izuku had zoomed to the door and opened it with as much energy as a 6-year-old could muster, which even after spending 4 hours planting a garden was still quite a lot, narrowly avoiding slamming the door into the wall behind it and squealing out greetings to the guests. Inko watched fondly as he told Mrs. Uraraka where to find her and grabbed little Ochako's hand to direct her to the backyard to play. Hoshi too caught up in the fluffy atmosphere to interrupt before moving to the dining room with Inko to watch the children through the large window by the table. He sure has a lot of energy left in him. Did you have the nursery plant everything, or is he just that hyper-normally? Ochako has always been energetic, but this might be the first time another child is keeping up with her, Hoshi said while watching the two run around laughing joyfully, displaying an innocence that only children could. He's always been like this. Back when the teachers were still telling me what was going on, they'd always comment on how he was almost always the last to settle down for a nap and kept the other kids on their toes whenever they played outside for recess. I don't know where he gets it from, to be honest. I was never that active as a child, and from what his father told me, neither was he, Inko said after taking a sip of her favorite comfort tea. The mother sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, just watching the kids until they finished the first cups of tea each when Inko asked for Hoshi's opinion on the arrangement out front, both stepping back out the front door and trusting the kids to stick to the backyard and stay safe for a couple of minutes without them. The step through the cobble and slate path towards the front gate to take a better look while Inko held out the map they plotted with each different type of flower and shrub and was so engrossed in fiddling with it that she didn't hear when Hoshi gasped beside her. She definitely felt the tap to her shoulder afterwards, though. I don't think you're going to need the map to tell me where everything is, Inko, Hoshi commented while staring ahead and leaving her mouth wide open. Inko gave an inquisitive hum while turning back to see what she meant. Suddenly, Hoshi's silence made much more sense. Both women watched as flowers by the dozens sprung up out of the soil and began to bud and blossom before their eyes. Bushes growing to fit the area they had set aside for them, and flowers popping up along the foliage right after. It was fascinating, beautiful, entrancing, and suddenly it stopped. The flowers all vibrantly colorful, the bushes grown to the perfect size. Even the fragrance was hitting them now. It was intoxicating. They felt like they were watching something straight from a fairy grove and couldn't look away until they heard Ochako shouting for them from in the house. Both mothers were startled from their stupor and ran back inside towards the back door, where they found a clearly distressed little girl trying to pull an unresponsive Izuku towards the house. They rushed in to find out what happened, Hoshi checking on Ochako and asking for information, while Inko made sure Izuku was still breathing. She lost all the built-up tension in her shoulders when she realized that he was just sleeping the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest signaling that he wasn't in danger right now, and picked him up to move him back inside while Ochako struggled to tell her mother what caused this. She still managed to pick up what the little girl was saying once she calmed down enough to talk through the tears, and her mother had picked her up to move her inside as well. We were just playing tag, and H was asking about MIQ Quirk. He just stopped talking and fell over. I didn't know why. Is he okay, mommy? The poor girl was distraught, and Inko wasn't going to let her sit there and blame herself. Not when she finally managed to calm down enough to remember that this was likely just a side effect of Izuku's quirk. His plant growth? Quirk? She'd have to do some research on that later. For now, a crying little girl needed reassurance. It's okay, Ochako, sweetie. I think he just got tired because his quirk finally manifested for the first time. You did nothing wrong, and he should be fine in a little while. She watched as the girl slowly turned her head towards her with confusion growing visibly on her face through the tears, which had thankfully stopped. But Izuku said He was quirkless. Did he fib? I don't like fibbers, she said while clenching her fist in front of her towards the couch Inko had laid him down on. Honestly, it was adorable, and Inko didn't blame the girl. She was a bit surprised that his quirkless status had already come up in conversation between the kids, but she'd ask about that later. No, sweetheart, he didn't fib. He was told shortly after his 4th birthday by a doctor that he was quirkless. He's been bullied a lot because of it, and it's part of the reason we moved here, to get him far away from his tormentors. The thing is, he got hurt really badly just before we left, and when we were at the hospital, another doctor asked for details on his quirk, a quirk we didn't know he had. The doctor said it had something to do with plants, so I kept it a secret from him and had him help me plant all those bushes and flowers you saw when you got here out front. I was going to keep trying different things with plants until I either figured out what his quirk was able to find a specialist with an analysis quirk to tell us directly, or exhausted every option and accept that the first doctor was right, and Izuku really was quirkless. Inko explained while looking directly in the little girl's eyes and pointedly ignoring Hoshi's gasps and distressed looks while she listened in. So, he's not quirkless? Why didn't you tell him that? He seems to really like quirks. I think you want to know if he had one. Ochako yelled, seemingly trying to stick up for her new friend and endearing herself more to the Midoriya matriarch in the process. I didn't want to get his hopes up again in case we couldn't figure it out. He's already had the bad news given to him once by a really mean doctor. I didn't want him to have to go through it again. But now we know. He grows plants. Would you like to see what he did? We can show him later together when he wakes up. Inko made every attempt to stick an excited look on her face. Didn't take much as she was quite excited, and explained her reasoning to the little girl in front of her while holding out her hand, so she could lead her out to see what Izuku had done. Oh, okay then, yeah. Let's go see what Izuku made. Ochako yelled while dragging her mother and Inko to the front door with her. Hoshi reaching forward to grab her and hold her tightly to her side and motioning for Inko to cover Ochako's eyes so they could surprise her with the whole view instead of her getting a spoiler as she ran out the door. Chuckling at the gesture, she complied with the other mother, and they moved outside while preventing the little one from seeing anything too soon. When they reached the fence gate and turned around, Inko removed her hand from Ochako's eyes when Hoshi gave the signal, and they both watched the wonder on the child's face as she was now taking in the colors and all the different types of flowers that popped up since she had gotten there. Wow, so pretty! Ochako squealed in glee, hopping down from her mother's arms and running over to get a closer look and freeing her mother to question Inko further. So, you didn't know your son had a quirk? Hoshi asked. No, his previous pediatrician/quirk specialist told us he was quirkless because he had the extra toe joint. I don't think he ran any other tests, and it irked me, so I did some research. That method has been outdated for the last 50 years. To think he turned my little boy into the shy ball of anxiety that you met when he used to be so outgoing and always eager to meet and talk to new people. Inko said while doing breathing exercises to calm the rage that boiled up upon remembering Dr. Tsubasa. I have lodged a complaint against him and the hospital he worked at. He nearly ruined my son's life because he was too lazy to run a blood test. She almost succeeded at keeping her tone steady and not popping a vein on her temple. That's horrible. I hope you get some sort of compensation for that, and at least now, Izuku won't have to deal with the stigma any longer. I'm sure his outgoing nature will make a return in time now, that he won't be dealing with people picking on him for his lack of a quirk. Not that I ever understood why that was such a big deal. My own quirk is kind of useless for almost anything, and my husband's is useful, but not terribly so outside of our profession. Speaking of husbands, do you have one, and if you do, where is he? Hoshi displayed her innate supportive nature and did her best to lighten the mood a bit with what she thought were pretty safe questions. Inko sighed at the last question, but decided to go in order. I'm being told we'll receive a small payout for the school supplies he's lost to bullying, another small payout for medical malpractice, a slightly larger payout for emotional duress, and was told that his previous doctor would have had his license revoked, but he is no longer practicing and has moved away. No one knew where to though, so I couldn't complain to him directly. As far as my ex-husband goes, I hope to never see him again after I caught him with his co-worker. She fumed again at the reminder of her adulterer ex-husband, but was able to put away the distressing memories quickly when she noticed Ochako running back to them. So she turned her full attention on the little girl. Mommy, do you know when Izuku is going to wake up? It doesn't feel fair that he hasn't gotten to see what he made yet, Ochako said in a raised voice while bouncing up and down and a small pout on her face. Apparently her raised voice was just loud enough to rouse a certain sleepy boy who staggered into view holding the door frame for support and looking at them with bleary eyes, clearly not quite awake yet. Ochako noticed him and shouted his name while she ran over to help him outside to see what he did. It might be that he was still not awake enough to process anything Ochako was saying to him just yet, but he allowed her to help him drag his feet over to the two adults until he got close enough for Inko to pick him up and turn him away from the plants quickly, wanting to surprise him when he finally became awake enough to realize what was going on around him. Izuku, sweetie, you in there yet? Inko couldn't hold back her chuckle at the clearly still mostly asleep boy in her arms struggling to get a grasp on the land of the living again. His quirk really did a number on him. We need to figure out how exactly it affected him later. Time to watch something that should have happened 2 years ago. Inko pumped herself up mentally and emotionally for this one. Are you following me here, sweetie? Nod once if you can hear me. A slow nod from her baby boy signaled that while tired he was indeed listening to her, and she took a deep breath. Izuku, do you remember Dr. Tsubasa? An instant frown followed almost immediately by a grimace answered that question. Do you remember how he told you that you were quirkless? Tears started flowing while his face morphed into a pained expression that she never wanted to see on her son's face again, and she was sure this was going to be a big step in that direction. Izuku. He lied. The tears didn't stop altogether, but they did slow down to a crawl while his expression turned from dejected sadness to inquisitive curiosity, still marred by a sense of depression and exhaustion. He told us that you didn't have a quirk based on an extra toe joint. Izuku nodded to show he remembered. That test was disproved 50 years ago. His eyes widened to nearly comical proportions at this, but he couldn't get actual words past his lips, just stuttered muttering so far. I'm going to show you something, all right? I just wanted to make sure you were ready beforehand, sweetheart. Inko said, watching as he gave a nearly imperceptible nod, while still making incomprehensible noises with mostly unfocused eyes. She sighed and thought to herself, this is probably the best I'm going to get for the next hour. Oh well, I've waited long enough for this, and I know he is too, before slowly turning around, making sure Izuku's gaze was pointed straight forward to see the freshly planted front yard that he himself helped put together over the last few hours. The effect was nearly instantaneous. His face froze up entirely. She was honestly a little worried because she noticed he had stopped breathing, so she bounced him once softly to reboot his system, so to speak. He took a deep breath, mouth left hanging open for several seconds before she reached up to close it for him, which he invalidated shortly after by letting it fall open again. She then watched in exasperation when he reached for his thigh and pinched himself, wincing painfully. He could have just given himself a light pinch before his face reflected the realization his mind must be going through right then. He probably just proved to himself that he was awake, which means 5, 4, 3, 2. Well, what? What? How? I don't know how much A about plants B, but they don't grow T that fast, alright. Izuku, of course, went through his checklist, starting with blaming his own lack of knowledge. A smart thing to start with. It reminded Inko just how intelligent he was despite his age. Is T this the Q quirk of one of the P people from the place we B bought these from? Step 2. Blaming someone else. B. But then H. How did it and not T take effect on until now? Step 3. Removing inconsistencies. B. But your quirk is M. Moving S. Small T things. Oh, that one wasn't expected. Repeating steps 2 and 3 again. He might ask Hoshi about her quirk if that's the CA. Is this why your quirk Kaachan? Earning a shake of the head and a gentle smile, but no verbal responses from the other adult. Inko would have to thank her later for allowing him to work through this on his own. B. But Ochako-chan S said her quirk W is 0G gravity. S so is that M means. Here it comes, thought Inko, seeing the anticipation on the faces of the other two people watching her boy come to the only possible conclusion at last. Titus, I did this. I did this. I did this. I did this. I have a quirk. I have a quirk. Mama havia quirky havia quirk look at sapratime kirk with theft flowers. Izuku began shouting, rocking back and forth in her arms rapidly enough that she felt safe enough to set him down on his own feet, where he stood rooted to the spot, his smile growing to cover nearly all of the space it possibly could on his face, his big eyes growing more and more expressive by the nanosecond. Inko watched as her son's face lit up like the sun, bringing forth a visage of pure and innocent happiness that she hadn't seen him make since before his diagnosis 2 years ago. Eventually, she will be following up in any way she could about that untraceable doctor, but she threw that train of thought into the sun for now. She instead reached for her phone and began recording Izuku, unhappy that she didn't think to do so earlier before feeling a tap on her shoulder, and moving her gaze to Hoshi, who was already holding her phone up, seemingly having been recording the entire time. How did she miss that? Hoshi herself leaning in to whisper that she would send her the video afterwards. Inko beamed at her new friend before turning to the sound of her son, singing to his new friend about his new quirk while holding her hands in his. Bringing a giggle up from the depths of her diaphragm on seeing the two children jumping in circles, shouting about Izuku's new quirk. This is a good day, she thought, and couldn't wait to watch Izuku when he inevitably remembered that he could now spend time analyzing his own quirk. Speak of the devil, he just started shouting about wanting to know what all he could do. And Inko? Inko was fucking elated. Gonna have to tell Mitsuki about this one. After an eventful afternoon visit from the new friends of the family, the time spent mostly enjoying watching Izuku try to break down what his quirk might be capable of, and Inko having called to make an appointment at the local quirk specialist clinic. Inko could tell how tired her son was after everything that happened. She got him to go clean up before bed and made sure he was tucked in before she left the room and grabbed her phone, making sure to save the video Hoshi sent to her. She really didn't know how she didn't notice her filming from the moment he showed up at the door frame, before shooting a copy of it over to Mitsuki with the promise of lots of punishment if she said anything about it to Katsuki. She watched as the indicator changed from sent to seen and set her phone aside for the few minutes that she knew her bombastic gal pal would spend watching the short video, waiting for the notification of a reply. She didn't wait long. Me file? Exciting news that MP6 sent. Yappy pom-pom bitch. Surprise face. Isaac got his quirk. OMG, he looks so happy, and that little girl is adorable. Me, I know, right? Look at her little cheek blushes. They're permanent. She's also got these little pad things that look a lot like toe beans on her fingertips. Makes things float when she touches them. She's also fiercely protective of Izuku, and they've only known each other for a couple of hours. Yappy pom-pom bitch, it's great that he's got a friend already in a new place. Have you figured anything out about his quirk or his education? Me, so far we know he can accelerate the growth of plants. Don't know the conditions yet, but we have an appointment for the local quirk specialist tomorrow. He'll be starting school in a week. Yappy pom-pom bitch, that's a nifty quirk. At least you'll never have to worry about having a nice yard. Do you know if it works on fruit trees or vegetables yet? Would save you a lot of money on food costs. Me, we're going to try it out in the morning. When his quirk activated today, it knocked him out cold. He was out for nearly 20 minutes while we were trying to calm his new friend down. I think maybe his quirk tried to grow too many things at once, and it looked like he might use his own stamina as a fuel source to speed up the growth or something similar. Anyway, we'll be planting part of the vegetable garden and some fruit trees we picked out today after breakfast, so that if he gets knocked out again, we'll have plenty of time for him to wake up and get cleaned up for the appointment at noon. Yappy pom-pom bitch, awesome. Hey, if his quirk does work on fruits and veggies, mind sending some to me every once in a while? It'd be nice to get some produce from somewhere I know isn't spraying them down with pesticides. It depends on how bad his drawback is. If he knocks himself out growing a few cucumbers, then we're going to be waiting on trying to produce enough food using his quirk for ourselves, let alone anyone else. Might have to wait for him to build up his stamina a bit more. Never thought I'd ever consider Izuku lacking in stamina. That child doesn't stop running around ever. Yappy pom-pom bitch, I noticed that too. He might not be the fastest, but he just doesn't stop. Hey, that's something you can bring up to the doc in your visit. If his quirk uses his stamina, like you think it does, maybe it also helps him build up his stamina to better utilize the growth aspect of the quirk. I remember one of our clients mentioned her daughter had a similar quirk that used her stamina to produce these spirals energy beams, and she said that as her daughter uses her quirk, she increases her overall stamina at the same time. Mio, I hope that's how it works. I was thinking I might have to put him into all sorts of sports to build stamina to have a hope of being able to use his quirk the way he wants. He spent all afternoon brainstorming ways to use his quirk for heroics. I know I wasn't entirely supportive of his dream beforehand, but if he can prove to me he can use his quirk to stay safe, I'll be backing him up from now on. Yappy pom-pom bitch, hey. Don't blame yourself too much. You were just a worried mother trying to keep your boy safe. It wouldn't have been so bad if the flaming pile of garbage was actually a decent person/parent and helped support you two that day. Anyway, keep me posted with updates on I's new quirk. I'm going to head off to watch a show with Masaru, since it's quiet in the house now that the brat isn't screaming every 10 seconds. Anger management and therapy have been so good even for the short time he's been forced to take them. Me, he's actually sitting through them? Color me surprised. Yappy pom-pom bitch. Well, the first couple sessions he was insufferable, but by the fourth time his therapist managed to break through his thick skull that he was being the opposite of heroic. He has been mellowing out now that we got him to understand that if you had wanted to, he'd never have been allowed to pursue the career he wants because of everything he's done so far. Me, I'll be honest. I wanted to. I really wanted to. That's not even the worst thing I wanted to do to him when I first read everything he's said and done to Izuku since he was diagnosed quirkless. I won't go into details, but you are perfectly aware of how scarily broad the term small objects is at this point. I never physically hurt Katsuki, but the thought did cross my mind. Yappy pom-pom bitch, thanks for that. I'd like to fix my boy up and not have him turn into whatever would be left over after you got to him. Anyway, the show is starting. I'll talk to you later, okay? Me, go spend time with that saint of a husband of yours. Still haven't figured out how he has the patience to deal with you and Katsuki. Yappy pom-pom bitch, har, very funny. He's amazing though. Waving emoji. Me, waving emoji. Setting her phone aside, Inko checked the time, stretched, and got up to prepare some food for the next day. Kaachan was nice every once in a while, and Izuku loved it dearly, but you needed more than pork cutlets over rice for a complete diet, something Izuku would probably deny with every fiber of his being. Once she had finished up in the kitchen, she decided to head to bed to get an earlier start in the morning. She too was full to bursting at the seams with curiosity as to what Izuku's quirk was capable of, and wanted to get to work helping him figure it out. The next day, Izuku's first coherent thought today was a simple one. Something smells good. Moving more on instinct than anything else, the boy appeared in front of his mother as she was putting the finishing touches on breakfast. A lot of breakfast. Mom, Izuku said, looking at the sheer volume of food on the table. Why is there so much food? Were you expecting someone over for breakfast? Inko chuckled at that. No, sweetie. The food is mostly for you. Izuku balked at that. I know it looks like a lot, but you're Ani Mitsuki and I got to talking last night. And we had an idea that your quirk might use your own stamina as fuel. So I decided to make you a big breakfast so that we can go out and test it out with the veggies and the fruit trees before we go over to the quirk specialist later today. Izuku didn't know if he could eat all of this, but if his mom said it would help his quirk, then he was going to give it his all. Okay, Mom, I'll eat as much as I can, and then we'll go out and see what I can do. He then proceeded to eat far too fast and required the help of his mother to clear his windpipe several times. He wouldn't tell her how many times he felt like throwing up either, but he did manage to cram everything she gave him down his throat. Maybe trying to jump out of his chair to run out the door wasn't the best idea after having eaten what felt like half his body weight in just a few minutes, but he was excited. He managed to hobble jog to the back door while his mom put their bowls in the sink and followed him out the door. Okay, Mom, where do I start? He was lightly bouncing on his feet now, full tummy and all. First, we're going to make sure our leafy greens are taken care of. I put the seed pouches at the end of each row for you, and you just need to put the seeds in the holes I left last night. I'm going to plant a few as well, so we can tell if your quirk works on things planted near you, or if you need to be the one planting them. Inko explained as she walked around the freshly tilled and weeded plot she had readied before bed the night before, pointing out where Izuku would need to pay attention as she went. Okay, I've got this. Izuku shouted before grabbing the bag of what looked like lettuce seeds and began putting a seed in every little mound and covering them as he went, accompanied by the thought that he couldn't wait to taste the super healthy and tasty stuff that grew. This went on until Inko stopped him to plant 3 seeds herself at the very end of the row, and they repeated the process for each different type of seed until the backyard was nearly entirely planted. They had been taking 10-minute breaks after every 3 rows, trying to find out how often his quirk activated, and had worked a full hour since starting that first row of lettuce when Izuku stumbled. Izuku, honey, what's wrong? Did you trip on something? Inko called out to him when she saw him face plant in the dirt. Honestly, if she wasn't so worried about him, she could have admitted to herself that it was very funny. He had been walking to the next section, one leg lifted to take his next step, but never coming down to catch himself as he continued forward. Underneath all the concern, she had the funny thought come to mind: Izuku EXE has crashed, and it took more effort than she was willing to admit to not immediately break down into giggles after she helped him back to his feet, pleased that he didn't pass out this time. I think I'm fine. I got super tired there for a second, and it felt like I just stopped. I feel a lot better now, though. Maybe you were right about Festamina being good fuel sourcing. Izuku had started trying to reassure her before launching into an impromptu mutter storm about what he thought happened. Inko was perfectly content with letting him keep mumbling since he was standing still while doing so, and she wasn't worried about another fall. Some by Miss still digesting breakfast antiphotis giving memory energy over time. Those are great theories, sweetheart, but are you sure you're okay to continue? We can stop here and go rest before the appointment. There's no rush. We have the whole week to ourselves before you need to start at the new school, Inko said, obviously trying to prevent her boy from overworking. No. I feel fine now, Mom. I want to keep going until we finish what you had planned for testing today, before anything else. Izuku rushed to make her understand that he didn't want to stop. He barely felt tired anymore, in fact, and he definitely wasn't trying to change the subject away from the new school. Definitely not. He ran to the next row and started planting the next type of vegetables, leeks, and it got almost to the end of the row before he almost fell again. He managed to catch himself this time, though, and he was able to play it off as him just tripping over his own feet in his enthusiasm. The vegetable garden done, they moved to the fruit trees and checked the map again for where they should go. Inko having purchased a lot of land to go with the house since it was quite cheap, and she was already starting to receive payments from the multiple lawsuits, she was allowing the least offensive people to settle out of court with her. Those, along with the medical malpractice insurance payments she was getting, had allowed her to buy out the land around the hill behind the house. It would be useful for tiered fruit tree planting, possibly even some rice if she can convince a few locals to help her prepare the paddy fields. It didn't take long before they'd finished planting the saplings and were back to the chairs set up outside the back door, relaxing for a few minutes and admiring their handiwork. It was a quiet hour or so of relaxing chatter, with Izuku feeling that same moment of weakness several times every few minutes, this time telling his mother about it so that she didn't worry when he suddenly stopped talking back to her a few times. They were getting ready to go back inside to have a bath and get ready to go since he hadn't felt that feeling again for the last 10 minutes or so when it happened. Izuku nearly passed out, the feeling so much stronger now than it had been while they were working, but not as bad as yesterday, so he managed to stay awake. And boy, was he glad he got to see this. It was like watching a video of all of the plants growing over the course of weeks in just a few seconds. Sprouts shot up out of the ground, vines crawling up trellises with flowers appearing sporadically across the plants that grew their vegetables from the flower buds, large heads of lettuce, vibrant radish and carrot greens fanning out to take up as much space as was available, the pumpkins starting to grow until they were half as big as he was. Glancing out to the hill, saw trees rocketing up in growth, standing taller than the ones he had seen on the pictures when they were selecting which ones they wanted to plant. Everything they just planted had grown to maturity in just 10 seconds. Everything except what his mother had planted, that is, which seemed to have not grown at all. The two of them watched in fascination as this happened, unable to say anything or look away at all. Once the growth had stopped, they spent the next few minutes staring out over the nearly baseball field-sized garden that looked like it came straight from a gardening book. Inko was the first to say anything though. Wow. That's a lot of vegetables. Inko then started giggling before she shook her head and whipped around to make sure Izuku was all right, fearing he may have been knocked out again like yesterday, but finding him staring out at the field with an awestruck look on his little face that made her want to pinch his cheeks and film the whole thing. She forgot to film this. Izuku seemed to snap out of his trance and tried to stand up from his lawn chair, but was having a lot of trouble getting his legs to hold him up, simply too tired now to do much, but unwilling to continue laying back in the admittedly comfy chair when he could be checking out the new plants he just grew with his quirk. He wondered if he'd ever stop feeling so happy about having a quirk of his own. Probably not, but now is definitely not the time to dwell on that happy thought. "Mom, can you help me up? I want to go see the plants up close," he asked, caught between worrying about the obvious trouble he was having with the simple act of getting up out of the chair, exasperation that he wouldn't just sit still and recover a bit, and her own intense curiosity. Inko picked him up and moved the two of them down the rows, stopping to check each plant at the ends of their rows to inspect for problems, and finding none as they kept going, eventually ending up on the hill in front of a large apple tree, its limbs covered in vibrant green leaves and large, shiny red apples. Inko picked one and rubbed it on a clean section of her shirt before taking a bite, much to his dismay as he wanted to try it first. His internal complaints stopped as he felt her freeze up mid-chew. Then he watched her eyes as they began to sparkle, and she continued at a much faster pace until swallowing her first bite. Amazing! It was all she could think to say, and yet it did absolutely no justice to what she had just eaten. She wasn't even paying attention to the apple anymore, as she was trying to come up with a way to describe how good that apple was. In her brief period of lacking awareness, Izuku grabbed the apple from her hand and took his own bite. Izuku knew he was young, knew he hadn't experienced all that much in his short life, knew there were varieties of even his favorite types of food that he'd yet to try. He also knew now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that nothing he had ever eaten could come close to how tasty this apple was. Inko, having noticed Izuku had taken the apple from her, reached up for another one and cleaned it off before joining her son in devouring the best piece of fruit she'd ever tried. They both finished their apples at the same time, each holding a core that they couldn't get any more delicious fruit flesh from when they looked into each other's eyes, each of their heads creaking comically to look back up at the tree and all of the dozens of apples hanging from its branches. "We tell no one," they both said at the same time, causing each other to break down into uncontrollable laughter for several minutes. Inko managing to collect herself and checked her phone for the time, nodding in satisfaction before addressing her son. "Izuku, it's already almost 10. We need to get cleaned up. Your appointment is in a little over 2 hours and we're sweaty and dirty. Let's go so we can rest for a bit before we need to leave." Izuku nodded, feeling a lot more energetic now that he'd rested a bit after everything had finished growing and having enjoyed that, in his opinion, magical apple. "Sure thing, Mom. I can't wait to try more of the fruits and vegetables when we get back. If the apple was that good, just think of how good everything else is going to be." The two made their way back inside, preparing for the appointment, and headed out with enough time to be 20 minutes early to the clinic, wanted to make a good impression, and hoping to have enough time to fill out any paperwork they needed to do as new clients. They once again felt the welcoming atmosphere with everyone greeting them and only a few asking why he wasn't in school, most realizing they were new in town and assuming correctly that he hadn't started school yet. It was a good half-hour walk to get there, neither feeling any fatigue from the trip and just content to enjoy the sights when they found the building in question. "Here it is, Mikumi Quirk Clinic. We made good time a whole 5 minutes earlier than I had planned for us to get here," Inko said when they got close enough to read the sign. They walked in, Izuku having held the door open for her like the gentleman he was, and strolled up to the reception desk, picking up the clipboard offered to them and finding a seat to fill everything out and wait for the doctor to call them in. The paperwork was just basic medical information and family quirk history, Inko absently filling in the blanks while Izuku examined the room. It didn't take too long to finish filling out the forms, and only a couple of minutes after that before they heard someone call their names. They followed the receptionist down the hall to a door with a placard on it indicating a Dr. Akatani Mikumi, where they were let in, the door closing behind them. "Ah, you must be the Midoriyas. Welcome, welcome. I was very interested in your file when they got sent over from Yazuta for General. It's not very often you get to correct a problem that has been left festering for 2 years. I can't wait to get this all figured out with you both." A tall man with dark hair, yellow eyes with square pupils, clean-shaven face, and a blinding smile wearing beige khakis, a purple button-up shirt, and a typical white coat addressed them before moving to shake hands. "Hello, Doctor. Yes, we're the Midoriyas. We're here to get Izuku's quirk checked out and registered. We've already done some experimenting since it activated yesterday," Inko informed the man. "Oh, it already came in? Great, this makes things so much clearer." Dr. Mikumi laughed boisterously and then continued, "You see, my quirk analysis is a fairly common one. It allows me to analyze the quirks of anyone I touch. The downside being it doesn't give much information at all for an inactive quirk, and even for an active quirk factor, I only get basic information if I don't see it being used in front of me. Can you describe what you think Izuku's quirk does for me, so I can get as clear a picture as possible?" "Yes, of course. When we were checking out of the hospital, the doctor in charge of Izuku's recovery mentioned that Izuku's quirk was nature-related, so he suggested we go out and do things like taking long walks in the park or hiking through the woods, or what we tried first after moving here, planting a garden. We planted flowers and bushes yesterday in the front yard, and within a short period of time, they all grew to maturity. But when they first started their explosive growth, Izuku passed out while playing in the backyard. So, working on the assumption that his quirk uses his own stamina as a fuel source, I gave him a big breakfast today, and we went to work planting the fruit trees and the vegetables in the backyard. We would plant 3 rows, then take a 10-minute break. I was hoping to give him time to rest in the hopes of it lessening the effects of what I assumed to be a stamina drain. About an hour into the process, he started getting tired briefly every few minutes, but seemed to be just fine, and we didn't notice anything going on with what had already been planted yet. So we continued until we got everything we had planned for the day done, including the trees, still taking the 10-minute breaks, and Izuku still feeling the draining effect every once in a while. When done, we went to relax on some lawn chairs for a little over an hour when he almost passed out again, and we got to watch all of the things we'd planted grow in super speed. Nothing that I personally planted was affected by the quirk, though. The apples were delicious, by the way, like best I've ever tasted, Inko explained as best as she could, the doctor not interrupting her at all, merely typing away, taking notes on what she was saying. "Okay, that's fantastic. So I know a few things already just based on that description before using my quirk. Little Izuku here is able to speed up the growth process for plant life that he personally plants. Needs more testing to see if his quirk continues to affect something that's being repotted or moved to a different location. The plants seem to take up as much space as they can safely take up without encroaching on other plant life in the area. The quirk takes roughly an hour to activate, though it seems like it only partially activates if he is still actively seeding more plants, only using a portion of the energy to offset the total amount required, possibly his body's way to prevent an abrupt shutdown like yesterday. Finally, Izuku is using his stamina to either directly grow the plants or as a fuel source to power their growth along with sunlight, nutrients in the soil, and water. We'll know which it is later, after a few more tests. Dr. Mikumi explained, stretching his fingers after his rapid typing, trying to document everything. He then stood and moved to kneel in front of Izuku. "Now then, like I mentioned before, my quirk works by touching someone. So with your permission, I'll hold your hand for a moment while I get a reading from my quirk to hopefully clear a few things up and get some more information." Then he waited for a response. Izuku was actually surprised he waited for a response before he used his quirk on him. None of the adults he was used to ever asked before using their quirks on him. None of the children did either, though. He looked up into the startled eyes of the doctor and the already watering eyes of his mother, before realizing, "Oh, I mumbled that, didn't I?" The 2 adults nodded their heads as sorry. "I am trying to stop doing that. You can use your quirk, though. I know you're in, not try to hurt me." Okay. Now the doctor was on board with whatever this child's mother needed from him to help this kid. No one should have to go through whatever he did, especially not at his age. Thoughts of homicide aside, he reached for Izuku's hand and activated his quirk. Then he got some information he wasn't expecting. "Okay, Good news and strange news. Which would you like first, Izuku? He asked with a perplexed but manic grin plastered on his face. Jigga, I really want some good news, came the reply after a moment to consider. Alrighty then. So, we got most of our guesses right. Your quirk is the ability to grow plants to meet your needs when you planted them. You are able to generate your own seeds too. Might eat up a bit of extra stamina, but you can. Just be careful when you're making seeds or growing large numbers of plants, especially right now when you just started using your quirk. You might use up too much stamina, and then you'd need to go back to the hospital, and I don't think you want that now, do you? Dr. Mikomi said with a softer smile now that he had more information on the quirk and knew what to mention next. And no, I don't want Mom to worry about me. I'll be super careful. So, if I can grow plants, does that mean I can control them too? That would be so cool. I heard about a woman whose hair was made of grapevines, and she used them to help build shelters for wildlife and assist heroes with rescue and relief work. Could I do something similar? Izuku said, enthusiasm growing the longer he spoke. I'm not sure how much control you have over the plants after they're grown. At the very least, my quirk didn't mention anything about controlling them after planting them. Izuku's excitement cooled slightly at that. I'm not saying it's not possible, just that my quirk said nothing about it. And it was back and climbing again. Now about the stuff we've guessed wrong or slightly off. Firstly, while your quirk does use your stamina to fuel the plant growth, it does not use the nutrients in the ground. You might be the most eco-friendly plant quirk user on the planet, little guy. Izukuzmile.exe has expanded in volume. Please install more space on face to display in entirety. Too bright, thought the doctor. Next, you seem to be able to pick and choose if your quirk activates after exactly 1 hour or just whenever you have downtime or are resting. Say you wanted to plant a new flower but didn't have anything else to plant afterwards. You have the ability to speed up its growth instantly as long as you're not still planting more. Dr. Mikomi said, enjoying the expression on Izuku's face while he took in the new information, clearly already wondering how he could work with that. Finally, the stamina use. You convert your stamina to energy for the quirk to utilize, but your quirk also helps you build up your maximum stamina reserves over time. By digesting food, your body takes in whatever it needs to function and grow, but instead of getting rid of the rest as waste, you instead convert it all to energy, which your quirk uses to nourish your body to build you up over time. Kind of like the stockpile type quirks, just not as versatile. Overall, when you use your quirk, you're training your body to be able to use your quirk better in the future. You're like a perpetual motion machine for stamina building. Whoa, that's so cool. That means I'll get tired way slower, right? So I can work longer without having to worry about falling asleep in the middle of a job? I think I know how I can build up stamina quickly. Oh, that will help me train really hard to want it. Izuku had launched into a spree of questions that he really wasn't expecting anyone to answer, feeling like finding the answers on his own. Doctor, you mentioned some strange news? Inko interjected, hoping to bring Izuku back to the relevant topic, which worked as he was now laser-focused on the doctor again. Ah yes. So, do either of you know the classification system for quirks? Emitter, transformation, and mutant. Though there's some speculation that there's another type, or rather a subtype, being called build-up or accumulation quirks. Izuku said before his mother could try to answer. Not that she would, as she knew he probably knew more about quirks than 90% of the general public. Exactly. So, normally when a person develops a quirk, they fall into one of these categories. Sometimes they might have secondary mutations that help deal with the drawbacks of their quirks. Like one of my colleagues mentioned, he found a child with an acid quirk that turned their skin a different color as a byproduct of raising the skin's resistance to acids. Sometimes you have secondary mutations based on genetics. Like another of my colleagues has a patient who's got the head of a bird, but their quirk has nothing to do with their appearance or birds in general. Your doctor at Mizudafa General says you and your mother here have vestigial mutations in your tear ducts that allow for excess tear generation and high-speed ejection of said tears. All of these are secondary or tertiary in nature and have little, if anything, to do with the original quirk, which means almost all quirks fall into one of those three categories. The doctor paused to make sure both Midoriyas were following what he was saying. Yours, however, is one of the very few we have on record that occupy two of these categories at once. His patient and the young mother across the desk from him now that he had sat back down were staring at him in shock. The accelerated growth portion of your quirk is obviously in the emitter category. The stamina build-up portion is part of a mutation. You basically have a core in your body right around your diaphragm that does all the nutrient processing I mentioned before. This would normally be considered a secondary mutation, but in your case, that mutation is vital to the use and growth of your quirk, so it's considered a primary. Attribute. The boy and his mother were still processing the information he gave them when he tilted his head to the side. Oh, and I almost forgot. The emitter portion of your quirk has 2 outlets. I just don't know what the other one is yet. All information now gathered. The Midoriyas bowed to Dr. Mikumi and thanked him for his time by giving him a basket of apples they had picked before leaving. Izuku bouncing ahead of his mother while she was on the phone asking if Hoshi and her family wanted to try the new produce, and receiving a yes in response, they hurried home to prepare. The lunch and dinner that night with the Uraraka family, including the husband Taiyu, was quite enjoyable. Everything that came from the garden was very well received, and the suggestion was made to try selling the produce. After the Urarakas left, and as Izuku was going to bed, he noticed his mother on her phone muttering about sales permits. The next day saw Izuku and Ochako playing on the hill behind the house under the watchful eye of Hoshi, while Inko went into town to get a permit to sell her produce. When she returned, she asked for help uprooting all of the vegetables so that they could be planted more efficiently for easier picking, promising a hearty lunch for everyone at the end of it all. Having 4 people working on it had sped up the process considerably, and after following the planting map Inko had given him, everything was in the ground with multiple short breaks in between to allow Izuku to stay awake, and everyone moved inside to rest and start making lunch. There was so much produce they could pick from, and the kids were sitting in the living room with a plate of assorted fruit in front of them, enjoying the huge variety they had access to. Izuku felt the big power drain again roughly an hour after the last seed was planted, and was given lunch right after experiencing it. Mostly mitigating the tiredness he was struck by, but the kids still fell asleep against each other on the couch, tuckered out until dinner time when Taiyu joined them again. Inko's POV. It was nerve-wracking the next day when she got up bright and early to help the people she hired to load up the truck she rented to take produce over to the stall she got permission to set up yesterday in the market square. Everything was crated up and packing in tight, though just as Izuku was waking up to join his mother in town. She would never admit to it, but she was hoping to make use of his cuteness to help pull in customers. Once they had arrived, everyone got to work unloading the truck and parking it off in the free parking a few blocks down while the displays were set up. It was only by rushing and tiring herself out that she got everything set up right as the locals started showing up in the square to pick out things for the day's meals. Her totally unplanned weaponization of Izuku's cuteness was working like a charm. They had pulled a large group of locals in who were cooing at the little boy who was fighting hard to stay awake, having been up since 4 with his mother to prepare everything. Eventually, a housewife remembered there was produce at the stall too, and she did her shopping before she left, making sure to wave at Izuku on her way back home. This seemed to be a trigger, as most of the other people also grabbed a bag of mixed fruits and vegetables. Even with all of the inventory they had brought with them, everything was still gone by the time noon rolled around. Many of the people who had bought something in the early morning had returned for more and cleaned them out. Thanking the ones still hanging around the booth, she told everyone that they would be back in the morning again tomorrow if they wanted to continue doing business with them, and pulled Izuku with her back to the truck, driving it to the rental agency and making sure to request the same people again for the same time tomorrow. This process repeated itself for the remainder of the week, with them accidentally discovering that if they didn't pick the entire plant, the part they harvested would grow back with reduced stamina cost just like normal within an hour. It greatly reduced their workload now that they didn't need to harvest the entire plant and replant everything every day. Izuku even had time to experiment with the tomato plant, seeing if he could grow different color tomatoes. Spoiler alert, he absolutely could, and seeing a rainbow tomato being chopped up and added to the sandwiches they ate for lunch was an interesting experience. The locals had begun talking about their produce now, and word had started to spread. Inko was pretty sure that a butler had shown up the day before she had to take a break to bring Izuku to his new school. She felt so lucky that Ochako was going to the same school and could help her look after Izuku and prevent him from being bullied again, that she handed the girl a small bag of mochi when her own mother wasn't looking and held her finger up over her lips to shush the little girl who was gearing up for an appreciative screech. On her way back home, she picked up some meat for dinner and was enjoying the peace and tranquility of the countryside when she noticed a very expensive-looking car parked out by her front gate. The same man she thought looked like a butler from the day before waiting patiently beside the car, giving her a polite bow before opening the door to the back seats. Inko then saw what might be one of the most beautiful women on the planet step out of the vehicle before reaching back in to help a small girl who looked very much like her out as well and started fretting about what could be going on while the pair made their way over to her. "Hello, Mississippi. I am Yayarosa Ko, and this is my daughter Momo. We apologize for showing up without notice, but our employee brought us some delightful produce that we just had to get more of if at all possible," the now-identified woman said, causing Inko to tilt her head to the side and bring a hand to cup her chin, something she picked up from watching Izuku doing his analysis, as she felt the name was familiar. "That shouldn't be a problem. Wait, Yayarozu? The support company Yayarozu? Where are my manners? Please come inside, and I'll get you some tea while we chat," Inko said, realizing who exactly she was talking to pretty quickly and defaulting to being a good host. "Oh, that would be lovely, and please call me Ko. I'm here not as a businesswoman, but as a mother trying to get snacks for her family," Ko said with a smile that radiated a kind of motherly love that Inko could get behind. "Follow me then, Ko-san. We may need to wait a short while to pick anything, so I'll get you that tea and explain our operation here, small as it may be," Inko said while leading the two into her home and towards the couches. Putting a kettle on to boil and preparing her preferred tea leaves for the week. It was a green tea variety, and yes, she would freely admit to picking it this week because of Izuku and Achiko-chan's name pun. "It's surprising that you heard about our produce. We've only just started selling it last week." One of our butlers in charge of procuring food supplies said he had heard a rumor about unbelievable fruits and vegetables being sold in a nearby small town. He decided to follow up on it and found your stall yesterday. Said he tried the sample you gave him and brought home a little of everything for us to try. It was all quite delicious. Momo especially loved the peaches. She paused to chuckle. "Huh? I didn't even realize it before, dear. Momo loves her momos." Ko then cracked up, unable to keep up her posture or manners at her own little joke. Momo's little face growing red as she pouted indignantly at her mother's antics. Several moments later, Ko recollected herself. "Apologies. I just caught myself off guard." "No trouble. It's nice to see that you have a funny side to go with the whole rich family persona you've got going on," Inko said as she moved the now steeping teacups onto a tray and brought them back to the living room. "Here you go. It's nothing special, but my son made a new friend recently, and their names are upon a green tea, and I just had to have some. We might be able to grow our own tea leaves soon if it turns out that's something he can do." Inko began muttering to herself towards the end there, lost in the possibilities of her son's quirk while the two guests watched her, intrigued by her comments. "You want to grow your own tea trees? It might take some time to see any turnover from them. They do take quite a while to establish and begin the process of harvesting," Ko said as she sipped her tea elegantly, Momo mirroring her on her right. "But what's this about it being something your son can do? Is he a gardener?" "Oh, I was muttering, wasn't I?" Inko said bashfully as she rubbed the back of her head, another thing she'd picked up from Izuku. "I guess that's not entirely inaccurate. Izuku's quirk lets him accelerate the growth of plants that he personally plants to suit his needs. He could set up a tea tree grove in a single afternoon and have them reach maturity the same day. I am just not sure how the leaves would turn out, as we haven't done much testing with the whole to suit his needs bit yet. He just manifested his quirk last week after all. The produce we've been selling was just from him testing his new quirk out." "Congratulations are in order then. It's always a happy occasion when a child gets their quirk. So your son must have turned 4 recently? He's not much younger than my little Momo," Ko said with a fond look on her face, obviously remembering either her own quirk manifestation or her daughter's. No. Izuku is 6. He'll be 7 in July. He was misdiagnosed and thought he was quirkless until last week. He had to spend some time in the hospital, and the attending physician let us know that he had a quirk dealing with nature, so we moved out here partially to help him figure out his quirk as the hospital's analyst on site was on vacation. We planted a garden and the foliage out front the day after we moved here last week, and figured out some things about his quirk on our own before seeing the local quirk specialist here in town yesterday. Inko explained. The Yaoyorozu women happy for her and her son at the good news. So you're saying he needs to be here to grow the vegetables and cause the fruit to mature? Ko asked, happy that she could get more of the incredible produce before the end of the day. No, we could harvest it now, Inko said, causing the other woman to gain a confused look. Izuku's plant growth acceleration is passive. It's always being applied to the things he plants. No, the reason I said we might need to wait until later is because his quirk uses his stamina to speed up the growth rates, and he's at school. It's a half day today as it's his first day, so he'll be getting out and walking home with his new friend in a couple of hours. In the meantime, would you like to see the garden? We could pick a couple of peaches or apples, and it shouldn't affect him too much. Momo's eyes practically sparkled at this. Yes, please. I'd love to see the garden and possibly try a fresh peach, she said, placing the teacup on the tray in front of her and bouncing to her feet. The action causing her mother and Inko to coo at just how cute she was being. It would seem my daughter has spoken for us. Please, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to see the garden, Ko said, placing her own empty cup on the tray and standing up to follow Inko with her now very excited daughter in tow. The trio made their way into the backyard through the kitchen and stopped to see a very well-organized garden with row upon row of carefully made lines of different vegetables, including some of colors the Yaoyorozu matriarch was sure didn't occur naturally. They could also make out the hill just outside of the fenced-in area with several fruit trees dotting the incline. Momo was drawn to one of the trees that seemed to have rainbow. Were those pears? Rainbow pears, hanging from its limbs. Inko took her time, showing the two around the garden, explaining what each of the plants were, and if they came across one that had been changed by Izuku in some way, she'd point that out as well. Her guests were so enthralled looking over some of the altered vegetables that it took a full half-hour to get through the backyard and onto the hill. Seeing the trees took a lot longer, as now Momo was making it very difficult to say no to her and getting one of every fruit on the way up. She took special interest in the aforementioned rainbow pears after Inko explained that they were safe to eat and each color tasted slightly different, and the peaches, of which there were several varieties to choose from. Getting the okay from Ko, Inko took down one of each of the pears, apples, and peaches for Momo and settled for an apple for herself and a mango for Ko. Making the 5-minute trek back to the house and into the kitchen, she prepared the fruits for each of them, and they settled down to wait for the last 2 hours for Izuku to be home and had a nice chat. Inko making sure to let her guests know that they were welcome at any time, saying she wanted to find more kids around Izuku's age to hopefully help him make more friends since he hadn't had any in a long time. Time passed by quickly with the good company, and they were cut off in the middle of a conversation about the legality of running a food vending service out of a residential home by someone knocking on the front door, opening it gently, and then a loud scuffling sound as 2 sets of small feet pattered across the floorboards into the living room. Mom/Miss Inko, we're home/here, Izuku and Achiko said, faces covered in bright smiles, before noticing the extra people in the room. Sorry for disturbing you. Chako-chan and IW were going to check the garden, Izuku said, his stutter coming back in the presence of strangers. Yeah, Miss Inko, we're gonna go see the plants and see what else he can grow, Achiko said before bowing to the guests and pulling Izuku down with her. My name is Uraraka Achiko/Midoriya Izuku. Pleased to meet you. Oh my, what good manners you both have. My name is Yaoyorozu Ko, and this is my daughter Momo. She is right around your age, the woman said, prompting the 2 children to turn to her daughter. Yes, hello, I am Yaoyorozu Momo, and if you wouldn't mind, I would like to accompany you. I'd very much like to see your quirk in action, Momo said, and anyone looking at her would swear there were sparkles radiating off of her very being at the thought of spending time with people her own age and possibly making new friends. If it's all right with Inko, I don't mind, just don't get hurt and stay nearby, Ko told her girl, content to sit with Inko and talk for a little longer before they would go out and collect some produce with one of their kitchen staff who would be arriving shortly with a van to transport it. Inko watched as all 3 children turned on the puppy dog, eyes at her in what could only be described as a critical hit of cuteness before shooing them out the door with a hand wave and turning back to Ko to continue chatting. The kids bolted for the door, and made their way to an empty plot. Izuku POV. Okay, Chaco-chan, what did Kyabakuin say about that plant he wanted to see? Izuku asked, clearing a section of ground before thinking about it again and grabbing a flower pot and filling it with soil and getting some mulch ready to go on top like the worker said at the flower shop to help keep water in. He said it looked like a tulip, but it glowed brightly enough to use as a lamp. Achiko said, a bright smile on her face as she recounted what their classmates said about the flower. He bet Izuku he couldn't grow. Only, I don't know what a tulip looks like, do you? And no, I don't think I do. Should we go ask Mom for a picture? Izuku said, trying to think about what to do if his mom didn't know what a tulip was either. I think I can be of assistance, Momo said, clearing her throat. She pulled up her sleeve and put on a look of intense concentration, a bit of her tongue sticking out without realizing it. Nothing happened for several seconds, and just as Izuku and Achiko were about to ask her what she was doing, sparks of various colors started blossoming out of Momo's forearm, until a photo fell off in her waiting hand, where she looked at it as if to verify something before nodding her head and flipping the photo over for them to see, and saying confidently, "This is a tulip. One of the purple ones. Pretty," both kids said while staring at her with bright eyes and wide smiles and barely looking at the photo. Was that your quirk? Do you make printouts of anything you've seen before? Izuku asked, and Achiko continued, those lights were so pretty. Do you make them those colors on purpose, or can they only be like that? Momo seemed momentarily stunned at the reaction before regathering herself and explaining, yes, it was my quirk. No, it's not to print out photos, though I could do that as you just saw. And yes, as far as I've been able to do so far, the colors don't change from what you saw just there. My quirk is called creation, and it lets me create anything I want as long as I know it's atomic makeup and have enough fat stored up to fuel the process. That's so cool. 2 of the 3 present cinnamon rolls shouted, this time causing Momo to step back from their enthusiasm. She barely managed to stop herself from falling over before Izuku was in her face. Your quirk is so cool. How much can you make at once? How quickly can you make stuff? Can you make things while moving? Can you make things move while being made? How much do you need to eat? He would have kept going too had Achiko not grabbed his hand and tugged on it gently. Remember what Mariko-sensei said about asking too many questions at once, Izuku? She said, pouting a little. Wait for someone to answer a question before you ask another one. He said, back straightened and clearly reciting something from memory. I remember, Sorry, Euro, Yamakan. I shouldn't have asked so many questions at once. I'm trying to do better with that, but it's a habit I've had for as long as I can remember, Izuku said, bowing at the end to hopefully assure the new girl that he wasn't trying to be rude. Why Yamakan? Is that a nickname? I've never had a nickname before, Momo exclaimed, her whole face brightening up before turning contemplative, but I think I'd prefer you to use my given name, or maybe Yamamo. Yeah, that could work. Yamamo, it is. Please take care of me. The now named Yamamo bowed to the 2 other children, earning a giggle from them, before they all began laughing. The photo landing on the ground, mostly forgotten, until Izuku leaned forward and grabbed it. So, this is a tulip? I think I can make this. I mean, it already exists, right? How hard could it be to make something that already exists? Izuku said, psyching himself up for the coming task. Oh, right, Kaachan. Could you grab me an apple to eat for when I make the seed and try to grow it? Achiko nodded, then turned on her heel and started running as fast as her tiny legs could carry her, shouting back at them, sure thing, Izuku. Don't start without me, I'll be right back. Izuku and Momo watched her run towards the hill, Izuku knowing that she was going to use her quirk to get the apple, and Momo assuming she knew how to climb trees. Momo turned to look at Izuku and took in everything about him that she could, eager to learn more about her new friend, but too shy to start asking him anything. She was still staring at him when he finally turned to her. Yamamo, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be a hero, just like All Might, Izuku said, determination burning in his eyes as he spoke. Momo had never thought about her future before. She was always so busy with studying everything she'd need to know to use her quirk and making sure that she excelled in all of her private classes that she'd never had time to consider what she'd use all of that knowledge for when she became an adult. She would need to think about it for now, and she told her new friend. She had friends now. As such, That's okay, Yamamoto. You don't need to know about it right now. We're 6. We have lots of time to think and plan and get ready for our dreams. Now let's see about this tulip thing, Izuku said, trying to encourage his new friend. He had friends now, and get back to what they came out to do now that he could see Kaachan coming back into the yard waving at them. Okay, so it's a small, black, oval-shaped seed. It grows up to look like one of these tulips, and it glows bright enough to use as a lantern. He needed to look up what a lantern was at school. He thought it was really cool that there was a plant that could glow that brightly and wondered where he should place it later. He closed his eyes and searched deep inside himself, feeling around for the core of his quirk like the doctor suggested when he wanted to try to make a seed with his quirk instead of just growing an available seed. He found it nearly instantly. It was a green ball just below his chest that seemed to do the thump-thump thing his heart did. He could feel the energy inside it, waiting to be used, waiting to create something, to grow anything he could want to grow. He gently pulled on the energy, willing it towards his open palm, imagining the seed and the description he was given and felt the energy being drained. The two girls watched as his chest glowed bright enough to be seen in the midday sun and saw the glow moving up and down his arm towards his hand until it pooled in his palm. The glow grew brighter until they almost had to close their eyes to shield themselves from the light when suddenly it vanished, replaced by a tiny black seed no bigger than a grain of rice. Izuku opened his eyes and stared at the seed in his hand. He'd be jumping for joy right now at his first ever seed he created on his own if he didn't feel so tired all of a sudden. Luckily for him, Kaachan saw him start to fall, and she reached out and grabbed him, her quirk activating and allowing her to hold him over the ground long enough to move him under a tree and lay him against the trunk for support before handing him an apple and taking the seed from him so he didn't drop it. She also handed an apple to Yamamoto and brought the one she grabbed for herself to her mouth to take a bite. She'd be happy to tell anyone that these were her second favorite treat after mochi now. Izuku managed to force himself to eat the apple instead of taking a nap like he so desperately wanted, his body refilling with energy as he ate and feeling just about back to full energy when he was left with just an apple core. He stood up and got the seed back from Kaachan and put it in the pot, then sat down beside it and held his hand over it while he reached for his quirk again to speed up the growth process. All 3 children watched as the new flower sprouted up from the dirt before Izuku remembered to add mulch and got it in just as the stem began to rapidly grow, bud, and then flower right before their eyes. A beautiful turquoise tulip sat in the flower pot now, not glowing just yet, but Izuku could still feel it drawing energy from him. Just when he thought he'd messed up because he was pretty sure one flower shouldn't tire him out so badly, the petals and stamen began glowing. A gentle light that could barely be seen under the sunlight, but it was there nonetheless, and it only grew brighter over the next 5 seconds when his quirk finally stopped feeding the flower energy. He leaned back far enough for the girls to get a closer look at it. Kaachan was staring at it with a big smile and happy eyes, while Yamamoto was staring at it with wide eyes and an open mouth. Why did she look confused, he wondered. Okay, I'm a little tired after growing that one. It took about as much energy from me as growing a row of normal vegetable plants from their own seeds. Creating the seed for it took almost as much energy as when my quirk first activated and I grew the plants out front all at once though. I need to find a way to build up more stamina by swimming or running of year ear good for stamina training. His words became less and less coherent the longer he spoke before he felt Kaachan's hand grab his again and he slowed to a stop. Izuku, we should show your mom the new flower you grew. She's going to love it. It's so pretty, the brunette said as she picked up the flower pot in her other hand and helped Izuku stand up. Yamamoto having moved to his other side in case he needed more support walking again like before, and even when he seemed okay to move on his own, she still flung his arm over her shoulder and wrapped one of her own around his waist just to be sure. Her personal trainer had said this was the best way to support someone who was still able to stand upright but couldn't walk on their own. She'd remembered it when she watched Kaachan move him earlier and kept it in the foreground of her mind, waiting to see if she needed to use it. The trio walked back into the house and came to the living room where the mothers were seated, Hoshi having shown up while they were out back. The adults turned to the kids, and Inko nearly panicked when she saw Momo supporting Izuku to get to one of the seats. She was able to rein in her gut reaction to rush to him and hug him as hard as he could stand it while checking him for injuries. He told her she didn't need to do that, and that sometimes it hurt when she did, so she was trying to take a second to visually assess him from then on, before jumping at him in protective mama bear mode. Having seen that he was just tired from using his quirk, she moved her attention to the little girls who came in with him and noticed the flower pot in Achiko's hands. "Achiko, dear," Inko said, looking at the flower with surprise and maybe a bit of apprehension. "What is that, sweetie?" The other adults now had their attention on the girl, and she proudly held up the flower for them to see. "Izuku made it." Kyabakuin said he didn't believe Izuku could grow it, and that it was his favorite flower. He said he liked looking at them when he was playing his games. Well, since he knew what it looked like and what the seed looked like, Izuku asked him for the details and what it was supposed to look like and do, and he made the seed and grew it just now, the brunette said, forcefully stopping herself from jumping around in joy, if only because she didn't want to hurt the flower and hadn't put it down yet or given it to his mom to hold just yet. The adults looked at her incredulously. Then as one they all looked at the flower, and their eyes started to open wider and wider before all three heads swiveled to Izuku, still leaning back in the chair, obviously tired but not enough that he'd fall asleep. Inko stood up and walked to Achiko and gently took the flower from her, holding it in her hands as though she were afraid it would vanish when she touched it. When it didn't, and she could tell it wasn't going to, she sat it on the table in the center of the room. Everyone other than Izuku staring at it, Momo having already been able to tell something was up with it, and Achiko reading the room, as well as a 5-year-old could starting to realize something was wrong. What's wrong? Was he not supposed to grow a plant from a seed he created without you watching? I'm sorry. I'm the one who pushed him to try it, Achiko said, worried that she'd just gotten her friend into trouble. The adults whipped their heads around towards her as Hoshi reached out and rubbed her cheek. No, my little Machi. You didn't do anything wrong, and neither did Izuku. Well, Inko. Hoshi decided to put this in the boy's mother's hands. No, little Kaachan, everything is all right. No one is in trouble. We're confused is all. Could you please go grab one of the fruits from the kitchen so that Izuku can recharge real quick? I want to see something about his quirk. Actually make that 2 fruit sweetie, one for before and one for after, Inko said, watching as the girl nodded with conviction and ran off towards the kitchen to complete her task. She turned back to her boy, Izuku. Would you mind explaining what you were thinking when you made the seed and when you grew the flower? You're not in trouble. I just want to know what your thought process was so we can narrow down something I think your quirk is capable of. She did her best to make sure he knew he wasn't in any trouble and didn't need to worry. He still did, obviously, but not as badly as he might have otherwise. I keep thinking that I might be going a little too harsh on the bullies and school faculty, and then I see him like this. I might need to increase the demands. Okay, Mom. So for the seed. Kyabakuin told me it was a seed about the size of a grain of rice, black and oval-shaped. He said that the flower looked like a tulip when it was fully grown, and it glowed bright enough to be used as a lantern. I thought it was so cool that a flower like that existed, so I said I'd try to grow it when I got home. Anyway, I did what the doctor said and located the core of my quirk and thought about making the seed while I held out my hand, palm up, and sort of pushed the energy towards my palm. There was a bright flash of light, and the seed appeared. Then I got really tired. It was almost as bad as the first time I used my quirk. Kaachan gave me an apple, and I recharged, then I planted it in the pot and grew it like I've been practicing, adding the mulch like the store clerk said to help with the water. It took about as much energy as one full row of vegetables growing from seed to maturity to grow just the one flower. So I'm really tired now, he said, and grabbed the bowl of mango chunks Kaachan had held out for him and began munching on them to regain his spent energy. He was happy his produce was able to quickly recharge his quirk. Really helped speed up the waiting periods. Inko turned her head to the other adults and held up a finger to her lips. Getting the message, they nodded at her, each wanting to see what Inko would have him do as a test. Inko took the time Izuku was using to get his energy back to grab a sketch pad from the entertainment center under the television and began to sketch something. She wanted to slap herself. There's no way his quirk could do something like this. Absolutely no way. She'd never heard of a quirk being able to do this. But the glow lip, she'd recognized that flower anywhere. She'd been an avid player of the game franchise where it was a staple lighting mechanic. She finished her sketch at roughly the same time Izuku finished off his bowl of mango and was about to stand up off the chair and go wash the bowl, so she took it from his hand and had him sit back again. Izuku, we're going to do a little test, okay? I just want to see if you can make this for me. It's one of my favorite fruit/trees in the world, okay? She watched him zero in on her at that. Knowing he'd do anything to make her happy brought a smile to her face and made her heart feel so warm. She still wanted to kick herself for thinking something like this would ever be possible, but she had to check it out. Okay, here you go. This is the seed and the mature version of the palpa tree, and its fruit the palpa fruit. She paused to make sure he was studying the drawing of what was basically a palm tree that had grown almost horizontally before reaching up and growing its fronds and fruit within arm's reach of the average person's height. Do you want to know why this is my favorite fruit tree? Yes. Is it really tasty? Izuku asked while Momo, Achiko, and Ko just sat there confused, but curiously Hoshi was staring at the sketch pad and back to her face over and over again, a look of understanding and then mischief on her face. She leaned over to Ko and whispered what the fruit did into her ear, trying to get her permission beforehand, so they weren't overstepping any bounds. Ko's eyes widened to honestly hilarious proportions before her head swung over to her daughter. Momo, sweetie, her daughter looked over to her. Have you and these two children become friends already? She watched as her daughter's face lit up with a blush and obvious happiness. Yes, mother. They have already asked me to be their friend, and I have accepted. I can't wait to spend more time with them. Momo nodded her head rapidly, trying to make sure her mother knew how happy she was to finally have friends her own age that weren't just trying to get to her parents through her. Ko sighed and nodded resolutely to Inko, who was now sporting a Cheshire grin, and nodded back to her before addressing Izuku again. You see, Izuku, the palpa fruit is a special fruit. It's also called the empathy fruit. Anyone who shares one will, if they're willing, have their destinies entwined and remain a part of each other's lives no matter what. It makes it so that you can more easily feel what each other are feeling, so that you can have a better relationship after eating it. Some say that if you are able to eat enough of them with the same people, you can even start to read each other's thoughts if they wanted you to. I had one a long time ago with Mitsuki. Not a lie per se, but she wasn't going to tell him it was a cake shaped to look like the fruit from her favorite game franchise. And I'd like to have a few more, and maybe you can have some to share with your friends. They taste like the best tasting fruit the person chewing them at the time would enjoy, so yours could taste like an apple while Achiko's might taste like a pear or an orange. Yes, I know, sweetie, you also love apples the most. She paused to rub the little brunette's hair. I haven't been able to find any more of the fruit, so if you could make us a tree, that would be fantastic. Izuku didn't even have to think about it. He would do anything to make his mom happy. So he reached for his quirk again, imagining the star-shaped brown seed about the size of a 10-yen coin. He kept hold of that image and pushed the energy up through his arm and down to his hand again, held palm up and waited while it pooled together just like last time. He felt about the same amount of time and energy be used up when his quirk cut off again, and he opened his eyes and looked down at the seed, exactly as described sitting in his hand. He gave it to his mother while she helped him lean back to eat some slices of apple this time. Noting that he wasn't as tired this time, but the difference wasn't all that much, still there was a difference, and that meant the quirk specialist was right, and his quirk helped him build stamina the more he used it. Inko held the seed up to her eye. Going over what she knew about it again in her head, she gained a glint in her eye as she showed off the seed to the two other adults and their kids. She struck a victory pose with the happiest smile she had worn since Izuku had discovered his quirk last week. Her baby was going to have friends for life. No more chances for him to be betrayed by the people he trusted most. No more Katsuki situations. The other mothers, now an honor plan, were also happy that their daughters were going to become good friends for life. They wouldn't have to worry about either of the kids hurting the other on purpose, and if they did, they'd know and feel compelled to fix it. Something none of them could have known, however, was that Izuku took his mother's words literally, as he usually did. They wouldn't find this out until about a week later, though. Izuku had finished off his apple slices now and was back to full energy again. He hopped down from his chair and brought his two bowls to the kitchen to be cleaned and headed over to his mother to get her attention. Now what, Mommy? Did you want to plant it? He asked, trying to finish helping his mom get the fruit she wanted so badly that she would ask him to make it for her. Oh, yes, sweetie. Let's go find a special place for this one, okay? Would you all like to come with us? It was a silly question, There's no way children were going to say no to playing outside, and there's no way Hoshi and Ko were going to ignore their curiosity at this time. The nods of affirmation she received had her leading the group outside again. The adults walked in silence while the children laughed and ran around to play, Izuku doing slightly less than normal because he wanted to save his energy for growing the tree. Inko found a spot, hidden in a thicket and between two boulders, still giving the tree ample sunlight if it needed it. It wouldn't, but it never hurts to be kind to your plants, but hiding it from anyone who wasn't actively searching for it. She dug a hole and had Izuku plant the seed, telling him which direction it should grow in to keep it well hidden, and then stepped back with everyone else to watch the show. They watched as the spot just below his chest began to glow, and he sat down and put his hand on the ground nearby. The glow then began traveling up and down his arm, coursing towards his hand again before seeming to pool there, not moving towards the seed they planted but also not being reabsorbed back to his core. Just when Inko was going to step forward, assuming the seed was a dud, and had already begun chastising herself for thinking it was possible the energy pulsed down towards the seed buried underground. Izuku sitting back now to support himself as Achiko handed him another apple which he gratefully started chowing down on. Nothing changed for several seconds, Inko becoming depressed again. Maybe she should go see a therapist at this rate. This can't be healthy. And then everyone's attention was caught as a small sapling broke ground and started growing up and towards the direction they had been hoping for. They watched as what looked like a nearly horizontal palm tree grew in a matter of seconds, the fronds splaying out in every direction before noticing small protrusions just below the bottom layer of leaves. The protrusions grew quickly, turning from the same brown color of the tree bark to a rapidly lightening green color, until finally turning a bright yellow/orange mixture and forming into a star shape. Izuku had a triumphant look on his face, while Achiko just looked at the tree like it was the coolest thing she'd ever seen, and Momo had joined the adults in marveling the strange plant. Inko reached forward and plucked a single palp of fruit that had fully matured, seeing the protrusion already growing a new one in its place. Obviously, Izuku was making sure they had enough in case she wanted more. She led everyone back inside once Izuku had finished his apple and tossed the core into the underbrush. She took to opening the fruit and chopping it up for the kids to share, then sat a bowl in between them and plunked herself back in her own chair while the adults watched their kids take the first bite. The week that followed was eventful, to say the least. Inko hadn't let Izuku tell his classmates about the glowing flower or the palpa tree, and it had taken several minutes to explain exactly why it should be kept a secret. She couldn't have it be known that Izuku could grow plants that don't naturally exist. The best-case scenario is him getting taken for a government program, the worst being kidnapped and forced to use his quirk by villains. Once all three of the children agreed and understood that they couldn't tell anyone who wasn't already good friends with them, the message seemed to stick. Then Momo called with a surprise for them, asking if they'd like to join her and Achiko for a concert being held by a group or family sponsors. Izuku seemed excited about it, and Inko, after much needling, was told they wouldn't be a bother, agreed that it would be a nice way to have fun together. So she agreed, and Momo and her mother came to pick them as well as Achiko and Hoshi up for the drive over to the venue. The gig was for a group called Deep Dope, and because of the Yairo's a family name, they were all seated in the booth, overlooking the stage that was set up for family and friends, but was empty aside from a little girl roughly Izuku's age with purple hair and little string-like things hanging from her ears. Inko had decided that she was adorable. She also decided to find her parents, as she shouldn't be left alone with all the people around here. She was just about to ask the little one where her parents were when Ko beat her to the punch. "Hello, Kyoka. How are you and your parents doing?" she asked with a motherly smile. "Oh, Auntie Ko. We're doing great. Mom said that she really likes the studio, and I finally get to watch another concert they're playing," the little girl said, face lighting up when she recognized someone before taking in the others entering the booth. "Hi, Mama Can. I've missed you," she said while glomping the ravinet. "It's good to see you again as well, Kaachan. I can't wait to watch your parents perform again. It's always a pleasure," Momo said while returning the hug. She then introduced the other two children and their parents and got everyone seated. The show was phenomenal, a mix of hard rock, punk, and a bit of pop that you couldn't resist moving to. Kyoka became fast friends with everyone, and when the show was over she made sure to introduce her parents to the group as well. Needless to say, They received an invite over to the Midoriya household anytime they wanted with the promise of good food and another couple of friends her own age. Inko had also noticed that little Kyoka had a sarcastic streak already developing, and she knew a developing tsundere when she saw one. Better to cement the friendship before that attitude takes over, and Izuku thinks she doesn't like him. She made sure to hide from everyone when she cut up another palp of fruit to feed to the kids when all four were over at once a few days later. She was leaving nothing to chance with Izuku's road to recovery and making new friends, who all just so happened to be adorable girls his own age. The grandbabies would give her diabetes from the sweetness. It was when the Gyrus were leaving that she, Hoshi, and Ko noticed the issue. Bye Izuku. Bye Kaachan. Bye Yamamo. I love you all. Kaachan. Izuku gave her the nickname, and she loved it, and Inko wouldn't let anyone say he had no naming originality. Squealed before she gave each one of the others a kiss on the cheek. Something her parents clearly weren't expecting if the flabbergasted looks on their faces were anything to go by. Psst, Gyro-san? Inko whispered and waved her hand at Kyoka's mother to get her attention before leaning in. Is little Kyoka usually this affectionate? I've never seen Kyoka behave this way with anyone. She doesn't even have that level of enthusiasm when she's greeting or saying goodbye to us. Her mother, Jiromika, whispered in reply. She hadn't taken her eyes off her daughter, who was still giggling and hugging the other children. I don't know what's going on. I'm not really upset about it, but it's confusing. Inko was trying to think things through when she heard the other kids say almost the exact same things to Kyoka and give her a hug and a kiss as well. She was totally going to squeal when she had a moment to herself later. That was just too cute. But now was the time to figure out what was going on, and she would figure this out. She had started forming a couple of guesses when Ko tapped her shoulder and looked into her eyes with an expression that said she knew what happened, and she was already enjoying every second of it. Inko, you fed Kyoka-chan a palp of fruit in that bowl of fruits you gave the kids earlier, didn't you? She said, eyes gleaming in barely contained glee that Inko just knew was the look of a mother getting excited for grandbabies. How did she know, you ask? Simple. She was making the same face herself. Izuku, Inko called out, getting his attention and causing the kids to quiet down and look at her. Izuku, do you remember what you were thinking when you created the seed for the tree you made last week? She watched as her son nodded his head at a speed that really shouldn't be possible, and she'd have to get him to stop that or risk hurting his neck. He opened his mouth, and the three adults in the know instantly figured out what happened. Yes, you told me that it binds people together by destiny, if they're willing, and improves their relationships while letting them feel each other's emotions and eventually hear each other's thoughts. So that's what I told the seed to do. Izuku answered with a bright smile on his face, knowing that he'd done exactly as she'd asked and not seeing the problem. Mika and Kyoka now had incredulous expressions on their faces, no doubt wondering what was going on and not knowing what to think about a child saying those things. Inko decided to head off any potential problems right here, right now. Mr. and Mrs. Gyro, how about I explain what just happened to you in the kitchen? Let the kids play for a few more minutes? Inko said while leading the two, still very confused parents into the other room while being watched by the other moms with picture-perfect shit-eating grins on their faces. This was prime teasing material for decades to come, and they all knew it and were ready for it. It didn't take long. Not even 5 minutes later, Ko and Hoshi heard a groan and a squeal coming from the kitchen where Mika came barreling out and gathered all of the kids into a group hug. The other moms saw no reason to not be a part of this, so they wrapped themselves around the little bundle of arms and torsos as well, shortly followed by Inko, who made sure to take several pictures of the activity first. I can't believe my daughter is basically married already, and I didn't even get to do the protective dad bit to scare her boyfriend or girlfriend. I was looking forward to that, Kyoka wailed, snapping the group out of their happy hug time. Inko was going to copyright that name, and prompting the children, sans Momo, to ask what married meant, as they'd only ever heard that their parents were married but had never had it explained to them before. Being married means you love each other and will be spending the rest of your lives together as a family. Inko said, consequences be damned, in regards to teaching 6-year-olds what it meant and basically confirming that they were in a relationship with each other now. By the way, Izuku, we need to make a new palpa seed later. This one isn't what I was talking about when I explained it to you. What do you mean, Mom? I thought I made it tea the way why you all wanted, Izuku said with tears already falling from his eyes. No, sweetheart, you did great. You made it exactly as I said to make it. The problem is that I worded it wrong, and you didn't know any better. You see, the pulp of fruit can create relationships like the one you four have now, but it is primarily used to help make friends for life. I should have explained that part better, and it's my fault, Inko said while squeezing her baby and trying to fill him up with all the love she could muster. It seemed to be working as he was calming down. Well, no use crying over spilled tea, Hoshi joked. Getting a chuckle out of a few of those present, Achiko could certainly have done worse for herself, that's for sure. The adults laughed, and the kids collectively tilted their heads to the side, each donning the same look of confusion. Oh God, it's too adorable, the mothers cried in unison. The teasing material was growing by the second, and every mother was totally unwilling to ever let go of a single piece of cutesy blackmail material for the future. The 6-year-old group of future spouses, Inko was thrilled. We're back again playing around in the backyard while Inko was entertaining Hoshi and Kao, Mika having been on tour and left little Kyoko with the Yaoyorises for the next month so that she didn't have to be away from her partners, again thrilled. They had planted a new palpa tree on the hill that specifically elevated friendly relationships less than a day after the prior debacle. The kids vehemently denied it when Kyotika demanded Izuku make a new plant to reverse the effects of the original palpa fruit, none of them wanting anything to do with the notion that their newfound connection with each other would ever be anything less than what they already shared. Kyoka being the staunchest defender actually, she had been moving around so much with her parents that she had no real friends, and the only constants in her young life were her parents. Her mother had to slap her father to get him to stop and think about the fact that he was yelling at 4 6-year-olds about something they couldn't possibly understand the negatives of. Inko would swear there were none, Ko would agree with her. Life went on though, the 4 kids playing around, having fun, and testing out Izuku's quirk some more with the random ideas they had floating around in their little noggins. Each child having agreed that any ideas had to be written down and approved by at least 2 parents from different families before they tried making it. The results ranging from useless trinkets like the glow lip that could never see the light of day, to a particularly ingenious type of grass that caused anyone with malicious intent to get lost until someone came to help them leave. They had planted the grass all over the yard and the rest of the property that the Midoriyas owned. It hadn't, thankfully, come in handy yet, but they had peace of mind that at least there was a frontline defense against intruders and villains. Inko having told the town authorities that a family friend had stopped by to apply their quirk to the property as a precaution due to there being just a single mother and a young boy living all alone. There were a few problematic plants, though, ones that couldn't be found out by the general public or hopefully anyone at all if it could be helped, such as the plant whose leaf could be ground into a paste and applied to any external wound to heal it rapidly, or another similar to an aloe vera plant whose fluid could be safely ingested to cure infections, colds, flus, and several other common illnesses. If any of those plants were made known, Inko didn't know what they would do. Of course, there were other plants that had been 100% A-OK to modify and sell, or just to have around the home. Inko decided to plant a tea tree grove as she had mentioned to Ko, and the tea made from the leaves was already gaining a following in the tea circles. They had done plenty of brainstorming and figured that people knowing Izuku could slightly alter real plants as they were growing would be fine for anyone to know, since it wasn't an ability that would get them in trouble, further backed by the Yaoyorosa group's legal team if need be. Safety secured. The tea was named Izuka, and it paired very well with either peaches or flour-based foods, or simply consumed on its own. It was noted to calm the nerves and provide a lasting energy boost to the drinker that wasn't noticeable to most but definitely had an effect if you paid attention. The success of the Izuka tea line prompted Inko to enlist the Uraraka's help with building large greenhouses for cold weather planting and harvesting. The project netting the family a hefty sum, along with Izuku giving each of the girls an equal share of his portion of the profits, nearly instantly wiping out the Uraraka company's money issues that Inko had heard Achiko mention one day, Hoshi and Taiyu having kept the information from her for several months. The tea, fruits, and vegetables they sold each day garnered so much acclaim in their small town that Inko had foregone the stall in the Market Street area and had started selling out of a newly constructed storefront, once again built by the Urarakas to handle the daily sales. This had the fortunate side effect of having Izuku's Quirk build up his stamina at a brisk but gradual pace, though it wasn't immediately apparent because of the constant increase in stamina drain when their customer base began to include several nearby towns and even a few cities in the area. Less than 6 months after moving to the Mie Prefecture, the Midoriyas, Urarakas, and Gyrus were financially stable and only becoming more secure as time went on. Momo had said that the monthly income she got from the tea sales from Izuku was good pocket change for her, which would have sounded conceited if it hadn't come from Momo, who didn't understand the notion that people would treat others differently based on how much money they had passed the business deals her parents took part in. The problem started, however, when Izuku gave Kyoko a flower for her 7th birthday. By itself, it was just a very pretty flower that smelled good, and most people would leave it at that without thinking any further into it. When in close proximity to the one he gave Momo for her birthday, just a little later, however, the plants gave off a calming pink glow the closer they got to each other. Izuku hadn't told the girls about the effect, intending to give another to Achiko on her birthday before he showed them what they did, especially when the 3rd flower would have made the group of flowers radiate a healing aura around themselves that could treat minor cuts and bruises. This wouldn't have been a big deal, as the number of times the flowers would have come in contact with each other while the kids were young and lived apart from each other would be near if not zero, Izuku had confessed later to believing. What he hadn't counted on, however, was for Momo to bring her birthday flower with her to see Kyoko a couple of days later during one of the Gyrus concerts. Nor had Momo planned for anyone else to be in the booth with Kyoko when she and her parents arrived. Thankfully, the only people who were present to see the peculiarity of the flowers were a family of legacy heroes, the Idas. The matriarch of the Ida family, her eldest son, and the youngest son being enamored with the flowers when Momo had come running into the booth to show hers off to Kyoko. The good thing that came from the encounter had been the youngest son, being the same age as their group, had become fast friends with them. Izuku and Achiko finding his rule stickler attitude hilarious, Kyoko enjoying teasing him, and Momo finding little Tenya to be an excellent reading buddy. By the time Achiko's birthday had rolled around, Tenya had shared a V2 palpa fruit with the group, and they were basically inseparable as friends. Inko had taken Tenya's mother and father aside the week prior to explain the differences between the two versions, and the Ida parents had discussed it with the previous generation for several days before allowing their youngest to share in the friendship bond. The empathy link they formed had the unintended side effect of mellowing out little Tenya's strict personality once he understood how it was making his friends feel when he would lecture them about admittedly small or nonsensical issues. His parents had been delighted, having not known why he was so stiff as a 6-year-old in the first place. Of course, with the increase in sales and customer base came the more frequent home visits from potential business partners. All of the extra people being at the house on a regular basis meant that Izuku and Inko had to remove all of the obviously strange plants, much to the chagrin of Momo, who wanted her rainbow pears back, and Tenya, who had taken a liking to the tomatoes of the same description. Today was one of those days where Inko was sitting down in their living room with a group of potential business partners. Thankfully, Kao had stopped by to help her with one of her best negotiators. This was also a day where all 5 kids were present at the Midoriya residence and were currently holed up in Izuku's room, since they couldn't play outside or experiment with his quirk for fear of interrupting the meeting or having his quirk be found out. "This sucks," Kaachan groaned, having plopped boneless across one of the beanbag chairs in Izuku's room. The annoyed look on her face, something that she rarely ever showed on her face when she was together with those she was linked to. "I know," chorused Izuku and Kaachan, both slumped against each other back to back, each having come up with a parent-approved plan to try out today, but being unable to test it out because of a group of pushy businessmen who had spent nearly 2 whole hours trying to force Inko into signing a blatantly one-sided contract with their supermarket chain. Kao had to call for her bodyguards she had left in the cars outside to remove the men after they refused to leave if Inko hadn't signed with them. The police were very interested in watching the effects of the labyrinth grass when the men had stepped outside and attempted to force their way back into the house. It had been entertaining for the kids to watch out Izuku's window, while the men in suits tripped over their own feet, trying to walk in several different directions at once for 5 minutes while the police were snickering, and Inko had recorded the whole ordeal, From the time they arrived to when their impromptu dance-off started right as the cops were walking up to arrest them. Be that as it may, we were instructed to remain here, in Izuku's room, until one of our parents came to get us. We need to follow what we were told, Tenya said, his arms chopping the air robotically as he spoke. The rest of the group having already gotten used to the motion, though it did still bring a chuckle to their lips whenever they saw it, and Tenya would readily admit that it was the only reason he still did it in their presence. I know, Tenya, but I just wish we had somewhere private we could go to play around with my quirk, especially for the stuff Mom says we can't let anyone know about. I know you miss the tomatoes almost as much as Yamamo misses the rainbow pears. Izuku countered, having gotten up mid-rant to reach for his closet to grab his learning guitar that Kaachan was helping him learn. He stopped with his hands outstretched, the doors just barely parted as he stared forward. That would be fantastic, actually. Somewhere we could all gather to experiment with our quirks while you grew whatever came to mind. I could ask Father to prepare us a building on the estate for that, but it wouldn't help us unless we spent our time at my home instead of Izuku's, and his is closer to everyone's homes. Yeah. Also, I feel funny walking up to those big gates at your house, Yamamo. Not that there's anything wrong with your home. It's a very nice house. I'm just not used to such a big house, and you have several buildings to go with it. It's still strange to me now that I know my family was struggling more than they told me with money before Izuku helped us out. I just can't wrap my head around needing all those rooms, Kaachan said, waving her arms around wildly as she spoke, desperately trying to reassure Yamamo that she didn't have a problem with spending time at her house with her. The young heiress picking up her intentions and panic through their bond, and giving the girl a reassuring smile to let her know she understood. You okay there, Izuku? You've just been standing there staring into your closet for a minute. Need help finding anything? Kaachan asked, a frown on her face as she began to get up out of her beanbag prison. She had noticed that his heart had started beating faster, and he had started breathing heavily, but still wasn't moving, so she became worried. Her question had gotten the rest of the room's occupants' attention, and each of them were now watching Izuku as he stood frozen, just staring at the small gap between the doors. Kaachan made her way over to him and tapped him on the cheek with her ear jacks, causing him to jump and realize he'd been standing there unaware of what his friends had been saying for a while now. Oh yeah, I'm fine, I think, Izuku said, his head tilted to the side, expressing his confusion at what he was looking at. Just remind me guys what was in this closet last time we opened it to get the chairs out. Extra chairs, futons, blankets, towels, and board games. Yamamo recited, Kaachan nodding vigorously at her words, having helped Izuku pull out the beanbag chair for Kaachan earlier. Right? Right. That's what though. So it's not supposed to have a sunny field in it, right? Izuku asked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Izuku, are you all right? Should I go get your mother, so she can take you to the doctor? You sound unwell, Tenya said, concern evident on his face, having heard the nonsense his friend had spouted. He's not fibbing. I mean, the bond said he wasn't, but Kaachan couldn't find the words to express what she was seeing between the doors that were still just cracked open. Yamamo moved to see what was going on, the bond giving her confusing information, and neither of her partners were making any sense to her 7-year-old brain. She moved to Izuku's side and grabbed one of the doors, throwing it wide open for the rest of the room to see. What she saw caused her to pause as well. What? Smooth Yamamo. Wow, there really is a field in your closet, Izuku, Kaachan yelled, eyes glinting with barely suppressed glee. She was already moving to run into the field when she was caught by the arm by Tenya, who had resumed his chopping motions. Friends, we should inform Miss Inko at once. We cannot go through this door without an adult going with us. He shouted in his attempt to grab his friend's attention before they did something they weren't allowed to do. He couldn't remember being told not to play in a field in Izuku's closet, but he also couldn't remember an adult saying they could either. Why, that's a good idea, Tenya. Let me call Mom so we can see what's going on, Izuku said as he went to the comms console on his dresser and pressed the non-emergency button. He'd managed to convince his mom that she didn't need to come running every time he called for her like he had been injured, getting her to install 3 different options on the console. Emergency call, non-emergency call, and Hi Mom. Each one sent a different notification to his mom's phone so that she could tell when he needed help or just wanted to say hello from his room. The rest of the group was still speechless, staring through the door into the field beyond. They heard Inko coming down the hallway just a minute or two later. Possibly they might have been staring longer. Izuku, honey, I'm here. What did you need, sweetie? The meeting is on hold now for the new hires. Izuku, what is that? Inko's greeting ground to a halt the moment she laid eyes on the scene in her son's closet. Unable to process what she was seeing. Yeah, I don't know. We were just sitting here thinking about where we could practice with our quirks or try out new plants, and I wanted to get out my guitar, and I opened the closet Tantarus feel and I know what's going in Botany think. Izuku began muttering while his friends continued staring at the field, the sound of his mumbling and the confused ramblings coming through the bond drawing their attention to him again. Oh, have either of you tried going in yet? Inko said, leveling a stern gaze at the 5 children, knowing just how curious they all were, even if they wanted to seem more mature. No, ma'am, Miss Inko. We decided to call you shortly after we found this. Whatever this is, Tenya said, both arms now chopping in different directions. Good. Izuku, please close the doors for now. I need to finish the interview, and I'll bring KO up here to discuss what to do about this. Inko said, already turning away from what she could only assume would be a headache later in the day. Wait, Mom. Izuku called out, prompting his mother to turn back to him with a questioning look on her face. Let me try throwing something in real quick. Like, Yamamo, what were those things that pull metal to you? Izuku asked as he turned to his raven-haired bonded. Magnets, Izukin. I just learned how to make them last month. She replied instantly, already seeing what he wanted and making 2 magnets and a ball of string to test his theory. All right, one test, then Inko relented, her own curiosity piqued, toss in a magnet, and then see if you can bring it back out. Then close the door until I finish with business for the day. Yes, Mom/Ma'am, came the replies as Yamamo handed a magnet to Izuku while she tied one end of the yarn to the other magnet as he threw the other through the doorway. Everyone watching as it bounced a few times before stopping a few meters into the field. Yamamo coming to stand next to him as she chucked the other magnet in after the first, getting it close enough to attract the first one to itself to pull them back in. Magnets successfully retrieved, the doors to the closet were closed, and the kids went back to their seats as Inko trotted back downstairs, decidedly not thinking about what she just saw. That was an issue for future Inko. Who was she kidding? She wasn't going to be able to stop thinking about that. Was it some sort of warp quirk set up to steal her baby away? Was someone using a very elaborate illusion quirk to play a prank on them? Was there someone in the house doing this right now? No. No, Inko. Think. What do you know about illusion quirks? The user almost always needs to be nearby to catch someone in an illusion, and that kind of thing would obviously be stopped by the grass outside. So possibly a warp quirk. She didn't know how to combat a warp quirk or how to defend against them. But it begs the question, why wouldn't the user just warp the kids away directly instead of putting an entrance to a field in a child's closet and hope curiosity gets the better of them? Scratch that. This is definitely a future Inko problem. Possibly a future Inko with help from a trusted employee of Chaos. Maybe a quirk specialist they can trust to not spread information? Inko did seem to recall the local specialist saying Izuku's quirk had another facet to it that he couldn't identify just yet. That's more than likely what's going on here. But why would his quirk put a field in his closet? Sometimes Inko feels like an idiot. Why else would a plant growth quirk give its user access to a field? His quirk provided him a garden. Okay, that's huge. And powerful. This needs testing. Maybe see if her phone's GPS works in there? Alright, the interview, that's still happening. Inko finished off the interviews and hired a couple of workers for the greenhouses that are feeding the storefront now, the workload having gotten too big for just herself and Izuku on the weekends. Having some extra hands there just to harvest and transport to and from the store and the growing areas would save so much time and effort. Not to mention her back. She isn't getting any younger. Business done, she brought KO up to Izuku's room to try to help sort out what was going on, giving her gal pal the short description of what they were dealing with on the way up. I'm back. Interviews are done, so we can try to figure this out, Inko said as she pushed open the door to find the kids still basically where she left them, chatting away together about new things Yamamo could make or if Tenya could get different effects from different types of orange juice. Is the field still there? Izuku got up to open his closet door, showing the room's occupants that the field was, indeed, still in his closet. He giggled at the thought. Nothing had changed as far as anyone could tell. There was still the trail on the ground from where the magnets were dragged out. Curiously, though, there was no dirt past the threshold. Inko walked over to the closet, explaining, as she walked, her theory of this being Izuku's quirk, and that she herself would test if the field was safe before any child would be allowed in. She tentatively reached her hand out to see if she could feel any sort of barrier. She was surprised when she noticed there was one, effectively preventing her from entering. Izuku, honey, can you see if you can allow me access to the field? If this is your quirk, maybe it only lets in people you allow to enter. It was her only option after a brief consideration. If it didn't work, she couldn't allow her son to try entering the place before getting checked over by a quirk specialist they could trust to keep quiet. Sure, I think I can do that. It feels like, when we go to the bathrooms at the train station and they have the red and green thing that you flip to show you're in the stall? It feels like one of those is next to your face in my head. You should be able to go in now. Izuku rattled off, growing more excited as he realized his quirk was more than he thought. He had so many ideas if the place was safe. Inko pushed again where the barrier was, noticing that her hand passed right through it, though it felt like she was pushing through a sheet as she made her way slowly through the door. Not noticing any trouble with her breath, nor was there anything else here that she could see, Inko brought her phone out, noting the lack of service. Her theory rang true when she saw that her GPS was saying she was out of the service area. Okay, this is huge. If my theory is right, my baby has a safe place to make new plants that no one else can access unless he lets them. Need to find out if he can move the doorway, though. I'd rather it be in an unused linen closet rather than the one holding all of the extra bed supplies and his toys for the kids, she thought. She made her way back into Izuku's room, noting that the feeling of pushing through a bed sheet was present, going both ways. She nodded to Ko to reassure her that it seemed safe before turning to Izuku. Do you think you can move the doorway? It would be more convenient if you could move the entrance to another door in the house that we don't use. Actually, wait a second. Put something inside before you do that to see if it stays when / if the entrance moves. Izuku put one of the magnets from earlier inside before, looking at the door again, his hand reaching up to hold up his chin as he considered how to do what his mom asked of him. He eventually had a look come across his face like he'd had an idea and closed the doors to the closet, his eyes closed in concentration. He opened his eyes at the same time as he opened the closet doors again, allowing everyone to see that the field was no longer there and all of his stuff was back. The look of wonder on his face made Inko feel like someone was squeezing her heart and her ovaries, but she'd already decided not to have another child, mostly because she wasn't sure she wanted another relationship. Inko led the group to a spare linen closet, removing the extra towels from the shelves before closing the door again. Moving aside as Izuku reached forward and opened the door, the field coming back into view, the magnet in roughly the same place relative to where they were now. This was fantastic. She asked Izuku to try to reopen the door in his closet again, while this one was still open, hoping that he could open multiple doors into the field so that they could test what happens when someone is in the field when a door closes. Izuku runs off with her hot on his heels, making sure the others stayed at the primary entrance to watch what happened. Long story short, he could open another door. It looked like an exact replica of the door he created the portal with got spawned in the field next to the already open one. Inko walked in while everyone else watched and had Izuku close the portal in his bedroom closet, watching with everyone else as the door faded from view from within the field space as she moved back through the door into the hallway. There's one more thing I want to check, but we need to be at one of your homes to try it out. How about tomorrow we go visit Kaachan at her house and see if we can open another door for her at her place? If it works, we try again at the Yaoyorozu estate, Kaachan's house, and Tenya's house. Actually, are all of the kids able to go inside, and did you have to set it that way, or were they automatically allowed? Inko addressed the group before looking at her son as she finished speaking, asking for the information. They were all allowed from the beginning. I think maybe because of the empathy link, he said, unsure of his guess. Inko nodded yes, that's what I thought too. It seems you might be able to manually add people to the allowed list like you did for me, but anyone linked to you through your links or bonds will be able to access the field regardless. That is fantastic. It's like you have a safe house you can access anywhere you can find an unlocked door. Happiness now radiated off of Inko. If there was no limit to the number of doors he could have access points in, then he could potentially carry around a collapsible doorway in his hero gear that would give him a safe place to hide during missions. Plans made for the next day, the kids were allowed outside to play again. Inko having asked them to hold off on exploring the field for the night to give her time to plan for contingencies. The next day saw a new portal open at the Uraraka's home with her and her parents gaining access to the safe space and a quick ride to the Yairozu estate to do the same there. The following day saw portals being opened in the Jairu abode and the Ida home. All family members having access granted to them on the stipulation that no harm be done to the plants that would inevitably fill most of the area and to abide by any signage for restricted areas in the case of potentially harmful plants. Izuku had been watching a pre-Quirk era cartoon with his friends and bonded about a team of heroes called the Justice League, and he had been interested in a plant he saw in the show, but said it was way too dangerous for anyone to go near as is, and he didn't have the stamina to make the seed, yet anyway, but wanted to warn people that it was going to show up in the future. Something interesting Inko noted was that the area in the field seemed to be growing, the sunny sky and rich earth growing to cover more of the void as the days went on. Presumably the size of his garden was tied to his stamina as well. They would have to operate on that theory, as all of the adults agreed. Bringing any quirk specialist anywhere near Izuku was a bad idea. As a byproduct of Izuku constantly feeding stamina to the plants that were harvested several times a day for the store, he had figured out how to stagger stamina usage when creating seeds, making it far safer to make new seeds when he had to operate at roughly 50% stamina for most of the day. His teachers being made aware that he would be a little tired for a while as his quirk was being used at home until he built up his stamina reserves to a point where the drain wasn't noticeable or posed a danger of sending him to the hospital again from overuse. Another month passed like this as Izuku was allowed to experiment more liberally now that he had a safe place that wasn't accessible by any prying eyes when the group found a new friend, or rather a new friend was hoisted upon them by some mildly unpleasant parents. Inko didn't like the feeling they gave her. They had shown up at the door to buy tea leaves directly from her and had gently nudged their daughter to go play with the kids in the backyard while the adults talked. The poor little girl had such a confused look on her face as she made her way into the yard to introduce herself. The kids had adopted her into their circle almost immediately, Izuku having asked about her quirk, and when the girl flinched away before giving them an obviously fake answer while cowering away from them, that was all it took for her to be brought into a hug pile. Izuku ran into the house to ask his mom to help him grab something from his room. Inko getting his message instantly and asking for forgiveness from her guests as she followed her son upstairs and into the garden so they could chat. Izuku filled her in on what had happened and asked if they could share a V2 palpa fruit with her to see if it can help them find out why she was so scared. Inko agreed without too many extra questions, not allowing herself to let a child possibly go back to an abusive home if she can help it, especially not if it's a quirk issue. She made her way back downstairs where she cut up one of the V2 palpa fruits for the kids to share and sent Izuku back outside while she distracted the girl's parents. "Himiko, I brought us some fruit to share. It tastes really good," Izuku yelled as he ran back outside, carefully holding the bowl of fruit while sending a message along the telepathy network they'd recently established that he'd brought out a V2 fruit to see what's wrong. His bonded and Tenya nodded, which came off to Himiko as them agreeing the fruit was tasty. Though she knew it wasn't going to be what she wanted most, she wanted these people to like her, so she played along, putting on the mask she had been wearing for 3 years now. Himiko took back everything she thought about the fruit from before. It was amazing. She couldn't quite place the taste, but she knew she wanted it every day from now on. The kids around her were giving her indulgent looks as she snacked on the fruit in the bowl. She knew she'd have to beg her parents to get some of this fruit for her, even if it had never happened. She noticed the kids around her stiffen as her mood dropped. She seemed to feel like they were upset at something. She'd never been good at reading normal people's moods. Her parents said it was because she was a cursed villain that would never be able to fit in with others normally. Why did they seem angry now? She could feel the childlike rage wafting off of them all, each with a pout on their faces as they attempted to keep chatting with her. She couldn't help but feel confused. Why were they mad? Was it something she'd done? She had tried so hard to seem normal, though. Well, I guess I really can't have normal friends, just like Mom and Dad said. Monsters don't have friends. Himiko, you're not a monster. What was that? Your mom and dad are bad people. Yes, super bad people. I should tell Mother about this. She can call her detective friend to check this out. Yeah, I can call our detective friend too. His name was Sakachi? Yet Sakachi. What was going on? Had she actually gone crazy? How was she hearing voices in her head? Relax, Himiko. You've joined our empathy link. Yes, welcome to the group. Please take note that you cannot tell anyone not in the group about the group. Somehow, she felt someone making robotic motions with their arm when she heard that one. Looking up, she saw the blue-haired boy chopping his arms up and down repeatedly while looking at her. Wait, the voices in her head. It was them. Yeah, it's us, Himiko. We added you to our link because you seemed upset earlier, and we wanted to know why. Your parents are super bad, the brown-haired girl said, while waving her arms over her head. Himiko thought it was cute. Okay, now that you know about the link, you can just think what you want to say to us, and we'll hear it. Can you please tell us what scared you so bad earlier? We promise not to think badly of you. Quirks are weird, but there's no such thing as a cursed quirk. The green-haired boy thought. To her, his emerald eyes boring into her own amber eyes with a deep sincerity that she'd rarely seen on adults. Never on a child her age. Why you promise? She didn't know why she thought she could tell them about her quirk. What made her a monster? But she felt like they wouldn't turn on her like all of the others. Himiko, I was treated really badly by everyone around me too when people thought I was quirkless. Everyone around you, right now, only wants to help you, but we need to know what's wrong first. The boy said, his eyes still showing deep concern. I like blood. It looks super cute and tastes so good. My quirk lets me look like other people if I drink their blood. My mom and dad said I was a monster the first time I saw blood when a little birdie got hurt, and I brought it to them to see how cute it was. I just wanted to help the bird and clean all the blood off of it. Himiko said as she began crying. The group instantly moved in to hug her from all sides. So, your quirk lets you transform into others when you drink their blood, right? The green-haired boy asked. Himiko nodded in response, still crying too hard to vocalize anything and unable to string together enough words in her head to respond there either. Okay, I got it. Wait here, the boy said, smiling from ear to ear before running off to a little shed in the corner of the backyard. Himiko thought he was super cute too. The others laughed a bit at that. Himiko pouted at them. What? It was super cute. We're not laughing at you, Himiko. Izuku is super cute, the girl with the stringy ears thought to her. Yeah, we're not going to make fun of you for telling the truth, the cute brown-haired girl explained. While I am not a part of their deeper bond, one can agree that most of the things Izuku does are cute, the blue-haired boy added. Very cute, the black-haired girl heaped on at the end, her face turning a bit pink. Oh no, they're all super cute, Himiko thought to herself. Wait, no, they're all blushing. She thought it to them too. The blonde girl plopped down onto the ground and began twirling her finger in the dirt so that she wouldn't have to look at everyone. The purple-haired girl rubbed her back in calming circles. It helped a lot. Himiko heard footsteps coming closer and raised her head as Izuku made it back to the circle, holding what looked like an orange. Why do you have an orange? Oh, my quirk is weird too. I can grow plants really fast. Any plant. Don't tell anyone about that last part. He looked super serious for the last part there. How does that look super cute too? Himiko thought. And they heard that too. Izuku blushed before continuing. Anyway, when we figured out what my quirk did, one of my first experiments, made these. He gestured to the orange in his hands, blood oranges. I thought that meant they were filled with blood instead of orange juice like normal oranges. He turned his head away while blushing harder, obviously embarrassed about the memory. Wait, Himiko thought, why you made a fruit filled with blood? This was too good to be true. She needed to know if it was real. She reached her hand out, and Izuku placed the orange in her palm. She studied it closely before moving to puncture it with her thumbnail. Be careful. Remember that it's filled with blood instead of orange juice, so it might make a mess. Here, let's go into the shed. It has a sink. Izuku thought to her as the group moved her into the shed to try the orange out of sight of her parents if they happened to look out the door. Now that they were hidden away, and Tenya had placed a step stool so that she could stand over the sink. Himiko peeled open the orange, watching with wide, fascinated eyes as blood began leaking out around her nails. Not wanting to waste a drop, she brought the orange up to her mouth and began to suck on it, the blood gushing out over her tongue, making her feel so cute. The others watched her as she got tucked into the orange, happy now that the link was telling them she was super happy. Like really happy. They grew a little concerned when they felt just how happy the blood made her, so Izuku decided to ask her a question. Himiko, when was the last time you had blood? You look like you haven't had any in several days. If you have to drink it for your quirk to work, then you probably need to drink it to stay healthy too. It's not good for your body if you don't have at least a little every day or almost every day. He thought to her as she was still drinking up the blood from the orange, nearly having finished the fruit as she stopped to look at him, confused at what he asked. Mom and Dad haven't let me drink blood since my quirk came in, she responded before she thought about what he said afterwards. Wait, do you mean I actually need to drink blood? I really am a monster, she conveyed, probably accidentally, as she fell to her knees and started crying again. What? No. Himiko, you aren't a monster. She wasn't sure which one said that, but she was too upset to pay attention. Her parents were right. She was cursed to become a villain who hurt people. She was hugged again from all sides by crying kids. Himiko, I may not be the best at figuring out social interactions, but I do know that parents should never say that to their children, Tenya said, hands chopping erratically as he continued to cry. Yes, Himiko, your parents are hurting you. They're also wrong, Yamamoto said to her as she moved a strand of hair out of the blonde's eyes. Himiko and I said before that no quirk is cursed, and there's no such thing as a villainous quirk. Your quirk has dietary needs that you aren't being allowed to meet. That's gonna hurt you a lot if it keeps happening. Having a blood quirk isn't even all that rare. Izuku shouted before he patted her on the head and thought to the group that he'd be right back again. He ran out of the shed and back into the house as the others kept comforting her. He made his way back into the shed a couple minutes later, holding a notebook in his hands, treating it like one of his prized possessions. He opened it and turned the pages until he found what he was looking for as he turned it around and showed Himiko what looked like a large young man with fangs poking out pointed upwards from his mouth, wearing a crimson-red costume with white hair. This is a new hero that just debuted. His hero name is Vlad King, and he has a quirk that lets him use his blood to make armor and weapons or tie up his targets. He also has to drink blood every day, Izuku explained to her, before turning to another page and showing her a woman in a dark red dress. Her hair was deep black and her eyes were colored red. Her nails extended from her fingertips in a thinking pose. This is a hero from a while back. Her hero name was Lady Vampiria, and she could make people freeze up and obey an order from her for a short time if she drank their blood. She made a charity? Yes, a charity, to help teach people about blood quirks. She said it was bad for a blood quirk user to not drink blood. It messed with their heads if they went too long without blood. Himiko hadn't been so confused in a very long time. Here was Izuku showing her two examples of heroes who were like her. People didn't call them monsters for having to drink blood. No, they were celebrated. Could her parents really have been wrong? All this time she wasn't a monster. She just needed blood to be healthy. The kids around her nodded vigorously at her, having obviously heard her talking to herself in her head. That's right, Himiko. Kaachan spoke through the link. Izuku showed us a few others too, who had blood quirks that went on to be heroes or doctors. He knows a whole lot about quirks. I sometimes forget that we're the same age. Kaachan explained, looking at Izuku with a small smile as he turned away, blushing again, while trying to stutter out that he wasn't all that smart, to the surprise of no one in the shed other than Himiko. Yamamoto pulled away eventually once Himiko had finished crying. So, what do we do now? We have to help Himiko. Right, the others agreed. Why'll help me? She stuttered out, tears threatening to fall again. Of course we will. We're going to be heroes. What kind of hero lets someone suffer when they can do something about it? Kaachan yelled while pumping her fist, everyone else nodding resolutely. Yamamoto, maybe you can talk to your mom and tell her what's going on? She would know what to do better than us for stuff like this. Kaachan said, giving out an option. Right? Let me make a call. Yamamoto said as she separated from the group, moving to the corner while pulling a phone from her bag. The others decided to let her speak in private and left the shed to wander the garden, showing Himiko around. The mood lightening as they walked around. Yamamoto, having joined the group again, eventually, as they were passing by the fruit trees, commenting on how she missed being able to come out here for a fresh rainbow pear whenever she wanted. Rainbow pear? Himiko thought. The group pausing and giggling again. She really needed to figure out how to stop thinking everything out loud. Don't worry about it, Himiko. It took us days to get used to it, and we still sometimes mess up, Kaachan said, trying to make her feel better. It just takes practice. We had to get used to it as quickly as possible to not have to hear Izuku's mental mutterstorms. She laughed when he covered his head and apologized repeatedly. Don't worry about it, Izuku. It's just you being you, and we love you. She patted his back, joined by the others moments later. Himiko also patted his head, marveling at how fluffy his hair was. The group wandered the tree grove for a few more minutes. Yamamoto getting a call from her mother during the walk and stepped away to talk to her again. She caught up with the group later to explain the plan, which unfortunately included Himiko going back with her parents today, but the police were already investigating her parents. She would be getting the help she needed very soon. Several minutes later, and another good cry behind them, the group made their way back to the shed to wash away their tears. Izuku stepping through a door in the back and returning with another blood orange, which Himiko made short work of. They spent the rest of the afternoon together before Himiko had to leave with her parents. Inko standing with the kids, watching until they pulled away in their car, having made sure to make it clear that Himiko was welcome at their house anytime. She turned to the group when they could no longer see the car with a questioning gaze. All right, spill it. What's going on with Himiko? The group filled Inko in on what they had learned, including that Yamamoto had already told her parents about Himiko's circumstances. Inko had begun crying at first out of pity, but very quickly morphing into tears of rage. How could parents treat their own child that way? She picked up her phone and dialed up KO, trying to find out what she had gotten in motion so far to see if she could help in some way. A long phone call and one crazy idea later, and Inko was out the door with Hoshi, having come over to watch the kids for a while. Himiko had come visiting 2 days later, running to Izuku and Kaachan, the other kids not there that day. The three shared a hug and moved to the shed again, where Izuku had given her a little basket filled with blood oranges to snack on as they talked. She told them her parents actually wanted her to come and play because it would get them a better deal on produce and tea if the kids were good friends. They ordered her to be useful for once instead of just being a monster. Himiko only teared up a bit when she said this, knowing they were already working to help her. The three spent a whole hour just talking, getting to know each other better before Himiko had to leave again. Izuku having promised her more blood oranges any time she came over, earning the biggest hug she could give him. She stopped by for an hour or so every few days from then on, until a month later Inko brought the girl to Izuku's room, where he was playing guitar with Kaachan, surprising him with the good news. Himiko's parents have been arrested. Her sister has been picked up by their grandparents who didn't want to take in Himiko due to financial constraints. You're free to visit them if you like, sweetheart, but that is actually better. You're looking at the newest member of our family. Inko cheered, watching as the kids ran to each other to hug one another tightly. She let them continue for a minute or two before adding, Himiko's birth parents gave up all custody rights for her and said they didn't want her near them anymore, which is fine by me. They didn't deserve her in the first place. I have finished all of the adoption procedures, and she will be living with us from now on. The kids ran to hug Inko, who had knelt down to properly enjoy the group hug, not caring about the tears and snot now covering her blouse. She left the kids to themselves to prepare dinner, having enjoyed the look on Himiko's face as she surprised her with. The last bit of news, she'd only told her that she would be looking after her for a while earlier. Her smile turned a little sinister as she remembered the girl's biological parents and what they were likely to get punished with, knowing they would never bother with Himiko again. It wasn't even a full day before Himiko asked to change her name to Midoriya, something Inko had absolutely no trouble granting. It was 3 days later when Himiko walked into the kitchen for breakfast with dark green hair and eyes. Izuku having grown hair and eye color changing spinach the night before without informing his mother, who was now breaking down in tears looking at the girl who could very easily have passed as her biological daughter and smothering her in the best hug she could manage. Pulling Izuku in and half-heartedly scolding him for growing something without getting her okay before smothering him with Himiko, with all of her love and affection. Several days later, Himiko had pestered Inko into allowing her to share AV1 palp of fruit with Izuku and the other bonded, wanting nothing more than to join their group, already declaring that she would marry them all, minus Tenya, who respectfully declined while explaining that he wasn't allowed to join the bonded group as per his parents, and giving no quarter when Inko tried to explain how big of a decision this was and that she could always choose to make it later in life, in case she finds someone new. This only served to upset Himiko, who tearfully explained that she could never possibly love someone more than she loved the group who saved her and gave her a future away from people who would have tortured her all her life. After discussing it with the other parents and the bonded group, a sliced-up fruit was shared between the kids, their bond growing stronger. Tsukachi POV. Naomasa was having a good day. He'd recently finished working a case for an abused little girl who was being starved of what her quirk required by parents who wanted to put forth a facade of normalcy. The parents had gotten off lightly in his opinion, each of them landing in prison for a minimum of 10 years without the chance of parole and a further 10 years with the possibility of being out early if they were proven to be reformed. They would never be able to be a part of the abused girl's life again, which they were currently happy with, but if they changed into decent human beings in prison over the next decade, it would weigh heavily on them for the rest of their lives. He walked briskly through the halls of the illustrious UA University, heading towards the dean's office to visit his friend and deliver a gift for his help gathering evidence against the Togas. He made it to the door, which swung inwards as he raised his hand to knock. Not breaking stride, he walked over to the sofa and joined the peculiar dean who he was proud to call a friend and colleague. The white-furred mammal, having already sat down reading through a stack of papers, dressed in his typical double-breasted three-piece suit without the jacket and wearing his custom orange sneakers. "Good morning, Dean Nizu. I hope you're well today. Your fur is looking amazing," Naomasa said as he sat down, putting a brown paper bag on the table in front of his friend, who set aside his papers to chat and reach for the bag. "Good morning, Detective. Thank you for the compliment. It's the keratin. To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit? And what I can smell appears to be a particularly fragrant pack of tea leaves," Nizu asked as he opened the bag and took a deep sniff of the contents of the bag, his pupils dilating and a grin spreading on his face. He hopped out of his chair and walked over to the tea set to begin preparing the tea for the two of them, returning shortly with a pot of freshly brewed tea as Naomasa took the time to relax and close his eyes for a minute. "I came by to thank you for your help on the Toga case and bring you a gift from the family who took the girl in. A family I was already familiar with, actually, having assisted them with a few dozen lawsuits against discrimination, hate crimes, and medical malpractice. They were so happy to have taken in the little girl the Togas were abusing that they sent over a little something that they had been working on. I'd explain more, but I promised to keep anything further a secret to protect their safety," he said as he gestured to the tea now placed before him and Nizu, the dean having already taken his first sip of the brew. "This is a delectable green tea." He noted how Naomasa snorted at that comment, the detective having been told the history behind the name pun. "Could you tell me the name of the producers? I simply must purchase more of this. It seems to be calming my nerves and, ironically, subtly boosting my energy levels." "Fascinating," Nizu exclaimed, his eyes glinting as he continued to enjoy the tea. Sure. It's called Izuku tea. It's grown by a small family operation out in the Mie Prefecture, then processed by a group of master tea preparers under the employ of the Yaoyoroza group. I'm told it goes well with peaches and flour-based pastries and confections." He laughed again, fondly recalling the group of children he'd spoken with as they explained the tea to him when he last left the home after checking on little Himiko, or Himiko as she now preferred. "Is that so? Give me a moment, I need to find out if that claim has any validity to it," Nizu said as he paged the cafeteria to request a small plate of peaches and their own recommendation for a flour-based confection. They chatted for a few minutes before the door was opened and a tray of food was wheeled in by one of the cafeteria staff. A plate of sliced peaches and finger-sized chrysanthemum tea cake set in front of each of them. The dean made appreciative hums as he tried the combinations, enjoying the contrast and flavors that meshed surprisingly well. He resolved himself to finding out more about the tea and the ones who produced it. "Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Plant Manipulation Quirk. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Micmager for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.